done that. Yeah.
You know, quite frankly, you know, I was saying,
Is that the thing? Yeah. Yeah.
should even have seniors, you pulled the seniors.
Go, new and improved. As voted on.
Steve's year in Thomas, now on him.
Yeah.
So you're this one?
Yes.
Yard seeded July 5 years ago with one hose. And it worked. He says, "Where are they going?" He says, "You know, well," he says, "You're talking about one try but only after time."
Help you, Dr. Tim.
Right, yeah, Randy and I had talked
Joan,
today
at one
about
point,
it.
my wife
Oh,
said, "You look absolutely ridiculous." Like, you had that meeting like that? I was literally soaked. I like probably tried before the meeting. I got 3/4 of the way through my watering routine, and I had to leave. So I had to show her where I was at, and then she has to do the plants. But I got it as far as I could get it. But there's the couple brown spots are bothering me, but I've been trying to hit those pretty hard. But
I think they'll be okay. Tom fertilized it today.
Here's an easy one
think so? Think I'll be mowing with a sod hold?
I guess I could always have Steve.
Put
go
down
to
turf,
the cage.
Steve.
That just seems a little too official.
Yeah, that would have been.
I don't want to
Combination.
That would have been very.
You're gonna bend the test case for our
That's
turf.
right.
I'm just gonna hate coming to a meeting, some of you guys are tip things.
That's right.
Just
No
keep
more.
going out there.
Again. The day before you're
Yours
gonna
will
vote
probably
on it.
last more than even 10 years.
Getting tired of that.
That'd be interesting.
Well, he said he wasn't gonna be doing it anymore. Let's see. I'm not quite sure I
So
believe
you're in,
that part.
anyway?
Too many statements of how much room we still have left.
You're not? Oh, maybe. Dairy nothing in there.
I did black for that.
That's the one-two policy committee. And if it has IEP in there.
Gary, this is because of Rebecca taking a new job.
Oh, new name on it?
So Ann Flahan, the board got hired.
That's right.
Now,
Okay.
Okay, so we'll do it after.
Okay. Where the authorized
Yes, exactly. That's true.
Yeah, I had you talking more. It is.
Yeah, remember Brian.
He is actually ready. Good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Waunakee Community School District Board of Education meeting. Regular meeting is Monday, June 13th, 2016. We actually started at 6:30 p.m., went into closed session. We are now back in open session. Item number 5, you will see in your packet the minutes from our May 11th, May 9th, and June 1st special meetings for your review and approval. And actually, the initial board book copies had some incorrect meeting minutes for the June 1st and the May 11th meetings. Those were since replaced, so depending on when you kind of opened up board book, you would have corrected copies of the minutes. So looking for a motion to approve of the minutes as corrected.
Move approval as corrected.
Second.
Moved by Joan, second by Jeff. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Motion carried. Any changes to the agenda?
The only changes are the updated human resource recommendations for tonight as part of the consent agenda. And this would have consideration for moving the curriculum presentation from our agriculture department, since we have some students and community members here, to the top of administrative reports.
Okay, so there's a request to move that presentation up after our listening sessions.
Yes.
Is there a motion to approve of the agenda with those changes?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Mark and Jack. Comments? All in favor? Aye. Motion carried. Item 7, public listening session. At each regular board meeting, we provide opportunities for members of the public to share with the board ideas on issues with respect to the school district, that are items on the agenda on a monthly basis. 4 times a year, we have any topic of interest that you can address the board. This is June meeting, happens to be one of those meetings. I don't have any blue slips in front of me indicating that members of the public want to share anything, but is there anybody here who would like to address the board on any matter related to the operation of the school district they'd like to share with the board? Okay. Hearing none, just as a reminder for those who may be watching that opportunity is available at each of our meetings, including our committee meetings as well. So when you see agenda topics that are of interest to you, you are free to share your ideas at those meetings. Okay, then on to administrative reports, and we are actually going to start then with our curriculum presentation, which is on the Ag department. And then feel introduce yourself. Here we go.
All right, I'm Rhonda Knapp. I one of the ag teachers at the high school.
Alyssa Banda, the other ag teacher that's at Waunakee.
I'm Hannah Stotts, and I am now a senior.
Thank you, Hannah.
Great. And with us tonight, we also have some of our FFA alumni members, so you can wave at them. They're here for moral support, and if you have any questions later on directed for them. They also serve as part of our advisory committee, along with our alumni. So we're starting off with our first slide here. You'll see the 3 circles. Ag education, according to our state standards, is based on the 3-circle model for agriculture education, which encompasses the classroom, the SAE, and the FFA. All of those components are intra-curricular, so they're kind of weaved into the curriculum, and they all tie together in basically the middle piece to develop the whole student. And they do a lot of their things focus on college and career readiness.
And the SAE stands for?
Supervised Agricultural Experience.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 8 courses that are going to be offered at the ag department for the year of 2016-2017. We're seeing a couple classes that are new to this semester. They weren't shown last semester, so we're seeing student interest in those as well this upcoming year. We also have a youth apprenticeship program where we have students like Hannah who are able to go and gain valuable working skills and getting school credit for the skills and the necessary activities that they do that work within our ag department curriculum. We usually have 9 to 12 students on average with this youth apprenticeship option, and we work with the Dane County Youth Apprenticeship Consortium to work with these students in their different areas that they choose. We have 236 enrolled students. We're up 34 students from last year's numbers, so that's kind of exciting on our end. But new courses that we are proposing, alternating years when we offer these courses are plant science, landscape, greenhouse management, ag machine and building, and livestock and equine management. We are also proposing new courses, which is food science, ag business, and biotech applications for the department as well, to broaden out to all of our different pathways that we offer in the ag department. Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, SAEs are an integral part to our classes. All students are required to do an SAE as part of their semester grade. It's their project they're completing over the whole semester to kind of showcase some of their skills, their talents, and their interests in the different pathways that we have within ag. We encourage them to create projects and to connect the projects to future careers that they're doing or connecting it to part of their life that they're doing right now. So for an example, whether it's Hannah show with her show animals through 4-H and FFA, or we have students that work at Ace Hardware, or they are working on different landscaping projects and coming up with different areas. They include career-specific skills, goal setting, money, time management, record keeping. We're kind of enhancing these skills with these students through their SAEs, and they can continue this project all throughout high school, whether they take ag classes or they don't take ag classes. We do want them in there with us, but they can continue in moving on through these throughout high school even as they move past us. They connect the classroom stuff and the topics that we've covered with some of their experiences. And it doesn't have to be specific whether they're taking an animal science class and their SAEs in landscape. We're still teaching them some of those career goals and career skills that we can help transfer them through all of their different courses. Their SAEs can be a placement, entrepreneurship, or an exploratory research project. So they have the options to connect with what they have, placements being paid or unpaid, working for a certain amount of hours, entrepreneurship, owning their own and running their own business or running and working with their own animals, and then, or any other topics that they have sole control over. And then exploratory and research, whether they're job shadowing for, say, a veterinary clinic, or if they're doing research on plants, plant growth, or in aquaculture tank systems. They have options to find and tailor what best fits them in their lifestyle. Right now, this past year, we had 11 students submit their SAEs for our FFA proficiencies. They can take them outside of the classroom, compete with them on the FFA level. And we had 1 gold student, 6 silver students, and 4 bronze students in ranking at the state level, which is pretty awesome. There's over 14,000 hours completed by students in their SAE areas, and that can be whether it's their work areas. We have also hours in community service and FFA as well. And just a little pictorial representation for you of some of the areas that we have our students cover with their activities. So if you notice on there, yellow is the biggest portion. We have a lot of students that work within the dairy SAE, but they can branch out to food science, equine, sheep, floriculture, service, sales, veterinary. Career success is other topics that they can go in as well.
And the last of our 3 circles is the FFA. FFA allows them to practice their skills and put their skills to work in competition type settings. Some of them are teamwork competitions, some of them are speaking competitions, so there's a little bit for everyone in every single one of the pathways that's represented by ag education. There's life skills, career goals, goal setting, money time management again for all the FFA activities. And we encourage them to continue their FFA activities into the alumni. We currently have 73 FFA members and events that run 12 months out of the year. So we work with under the summer school type contract during the summer for all of our summer. A lot of our summer things are either leadership workshops or community service based. And we also compete not only on the local level, but also on the state and national level with events that are going on throughout the year. So FFA, as we mentioned, is a CTSO, Career and Technical Student Organization, which is an intra-curricular. So it is part of our curriculum. We teach about it, but we teach it in the sense of leadership, in the sense of places to practice their knowledge that they've learned in the classroom, and also places to showcase their SAE, their entrepreneurship, or their placement projects, or their research projects that they're working towards. Along with that, we also like to tie into our FFA alumni. We currently have 31 annual members, 12 lifetime members, and 29 associate members that are FFA alumni. And those FFA alumni make up some of our former students, some of our former parents of former students, but anyone does not need to have been an FFA member can join the alumni. Basically anyone that wants to support, and like I said, that's our main support, as well as our advisory for a lot of our activities. They also help with things like scholarships every year for our students, helping to pay for leadership conferences, they helped us to purchase a laptop cart and laptops for the ag department this year. They have been judges for our speaking contest and also helped to judge or prepare students for speaking contests, especially in the job interview contest. And they have also been chaperones from time to time for different events as well. And then they also help with the test plot or land lab. And they help with the other community members and other family members of students to plant, harvest, and maintain the fertilizer and the spray for our FFA test plot. So also in your board book, I don't have them in the slides, there were 2 or 3 other things that we sent you. Just an overview. You have them up there? Okay.
So are you done with the slide?
Yep.
Which one of these would you like?
either one. So we can start with the proposed ag changes. This is just the overview of what our courses look like for you. So if there are any questions, maybe we'll go questions piece by piece on these to focus on any questions on this piece. If you've had a chance to look at it.
You had mentioned, Brenda, about that you have some growing student needs, or more students who are interested. Where do you see that those students are falling within your courses? In any one particular, or any cluster in particular?
Usually the majority of our students focus on the animals. Our animal pathway is definitely our largest. We're trying to extend the biotech pathway because that's where our highest student interest is. Currently it's part of the AP Bio trilogy, and so we get a lot of students that take it just because it's part of the AP Bio sequence. But I would like to entice them to seriously consider biotechnology as a career, not just take it because it checks off a checkbox. So that is why we're introducing another level of biotechnology, more of a career focused.
Is it fair to say that a lot of the changes you shared with us are dual credit that wasn't there before and that sort of thing, or not?
The name change to horticulture is because of a dual credit with Southwest Tech, and that would take on the same name as the dual credit at Southwest Tech. Our alternating years are pretty much the way that they are right now. Horticulture runs every other year. Livestock usually runs every other year. So we're allowing students fewer choices in even years and odd years to kind of funnel students into that pathway one year. And if they can't take it that year, then they know for sure the class will be offered less years. Any other questions on this?
Could you just maybe describe a little bit what more goes on in the pet care class? Because that is when I do sometimes get questions about why are we offering a class entitled that for credit at high school. That's something I taught my kids to do. It's why we got a dog. So tell me a little bit more about what goes on in that class. What's some of the science behind it and what are they learning?
With the pet care class, they learn more than just about dogs and cats. We go a couple different projects within there for them to dive into an interest that they have in other exotic animals. We had quite a few presentations and research done this year with like hedgehogs, and they were looking at sugar gliders and chinchillas and things like that. It's not just pet care and the responsibility of owning a pet. We go into the science of their nutrition and the different food label comparisons and trying to make informed decisions on what pets are good for your lifestyle, or going with the science behind the different reasonings why pet behavior is a certain way. That way we can take it from the animal science perspective, where they're looking at the molecular level and they're looking at the systems level, and branching out and separating large animal science, which would be our livestock class, and they have the option for a pet care, so they specialize in just small animals. So we have more time to focus on the specific aspects of said animals that they see more often and are more familiar with, and they can gain that knowledge that they need to be a more informed pet owner.
That's helpful, thank you.
Okay. So there might be like a potential name change just because of perception of the name versus small animal care. You know, you could like call it small animal care as opposed to large animal care or something like that. Something to think about it, because it sounds like there's a perception out there. Okay. Interesting.
We do get a lot of students that if they take an ag class, pet care is the one they take.
Okay.
And they take it because they actually get to work with the animals. This is where the animals in our animal lab come into play. And that's one of our biggest draws into that class. That's why we almost always run 2 sections of that class in the spring, is because kids actually get to work with live animals in the school building.
So that would probably be a good choice for someone considering a field like wanting to be a vet tech. I mean, even if not a full vet, but somebody who,
Yep.
yeah, or run a pet care business or
Grooming or going
Yeah.
with any kind of care. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So this was then the greenhouse report When I met with the curriculum committee, they gave me a few other options or pointers as to what they thought would be in here. Basically, this is the statement that we plan on using as kind of a promotional piece for, you know, where does the money from the greenhouse go? We are making a profit. We are giving back to the community, and you can see down below where all of these plants go. We had over 3,350 plants that were planted. The majority of those did not go for sale. The majority of those went to these organizations that you see listed here. So it's really a community-based. We're helping out with community service and other sorts of projects with this event. And we also have, this time of year, no greenhouse work. We cleaned it out on Friday when we got back from our officer retreat. We've got our off-season, which is the dormant period. So basically it prevents the insects and diseases from transferring from one year to the next. They're less likely to be there if there are no plants in the greenhouse, limits the use of us having to use chemicals, and also limits us from having to find people to water 3 to 4 times a day. Because even with our greenhouse system, the way it's set up, it still gets over 100 degrees. And if we wanted to continue working, we would have, through the entire summer, we would have to add air conditioning to the greenhouse to make it feasible to use it during this time. So we just...
Question, when we built the new greenhouse, wasn't that the problem that you had with the other greenhouse, that it got too hot in the summertime? And wasn't this one supposed to...
The other greenhouse is not a greenhouse. It's a sunroom. It's a solarium. It was never meant to actually house plants. So it's more of a tropical environment. So any tropical plant is fine. Our mother-in-law's tongue and our aloe vera do just fine over the summer. We have a couple other ones, more of houseplant, along the lines of houseplants. But you put any vegetable in there for more than 2 hours, and it's already dehydrated and wilting. So even with the new ventilation that we just got updated in that greenhouse, we had tomato plants that watered twice a day still died by the next morning. So it's not a greenhouse.
So is the profit on the greenhouse all from that plant sale?
That is just from the plant sale.
Wow.
Yep.
Thanks for the onions.
I also see on one of the projects says like, the working with some of the elementary school students.
Yes.
Okay, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I was there. We went to Prairie School twice. Yeah. Okay, so we went twice and we met with the 4th graders, and the first time we went, we planted the seeds in the trays. So we let them fill it with dirt and then put the seeds in, and then we covered it with dirt again. And then we came back and we transplanted that into bigger pots so that they could have more room to grow.
And then later I just do a drop off of plants for their garden. So over 150 plants went to the prairie for their vegetable garden. But at that time of year, they are so busy, they just have their end of year activities. So dropped them off in the garden and sent a message that your plants are here. So they could fit it in whenever they had time. That's a great connection that we hope to continue.
And then I also see the Pay It Forward as well, Club,
Yes.
the Garden of Dreams. Yep.
Yep.
Continues to grow. No pun intended.
Right.
Okay, Mark?
I'd just like to congratulate and thank you for as much community outreach as you have your kids doing. It's really amazing. Not just the immediate community, but the Dane County community is very impressive.
Any other questions or comments? Was there another handout?
There's one more.
Okay.
This was just a mission statement that we had come up with when we first started the greenhouse. And basically it incorporates the 3-circle model. So what we're using it for in the classroom, what we're using it for as far as SAEs go, and then also how we're working with the FFA, primarily for community service experiences.
I did have one quick question. Is the test plot, or what you call it your test plot, is that now on the other Woodland site?
Correct.
Okay, got it. So we'll see things growing there at some point. Okay, and that's where FFA alumni kind of help out with equipment needs to get things planted and
Yes.
harvested?
Yep.
Okay, thank you for your support. Any other questions from board members regarding what's going on in our ag department? Thank you.
Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.
Okay, then back on up to administrative reports, recommendations. Item A, I don't think we have any student representatives. So on to board reports. Anybody have items that they want to report on or share with everyone? Since our last board.
I'd like to share, I had the opportunity, or took the opportunity to attend the last meeting on the education award that has been proposed by the commissioner. And I'm not sure how many board members have attended a meeting or are aware of what is happening with that project.
What project is that?
The Commissioner's art project.
Oh, Nick, okay.
So
Okay.
the commissioner would like, so are you aware of where
Yeah.
this is
I
at?
don't know where it is, but I noticed.
And I'm not exactly sure where it's going next. Nick was not at this meeting. Nick was out of the country. He is home now. Actually, I'm going to be seeing him tomorrow. I might have a chance to chat with him. His lawyer was there to kind of represent him. And I think the next phase is to actually find artists, maybe local artists, that might be putting some of the ideas that the students presented. After, I think, a series of drafts and ideas that the kids have come up with, 3 artists kind of followed through and made presentations to us at that morning meeting. And they all had, I think, a very different but a similar theme of a kind of a symbolic representation of what a teacher is and meant to them. And it was impressive, the symbolism that was displayed, as well as the creativity that they put into this. So, you know, I think the hope is maybe to blend the ideas that are now on the table and take it to an artist and have somebody actually start pounding out some prices and doing some fundraising. And anyway, it's we had been told there were going to be some scanning of their work, and so that we could show you what they were coming up with. And I'm hoping that that's still coming from there. We need to kind of maybe touch base, and maybe at a future meeting we can look at some of the ideas. But anyway, it was very interesting, and hopefully it keeps moving forward in some fashion.
Yeah, so these were senior art students who have come up with concept designs for the sculpture.
So this was actually the second time they had been in front of the group that had really been working with Nick. They first came about 2 months ago. They received input, then took it back to their classmates, tossed ideas around, and then revised their concepts and brought them back to really the invitation that I brought out to the board. So I appreciate those of you who were able to make it. And I wanted the kids to have the experience of presenting something that they really had as a concept.
They were very impressive.
They're pretty neat.
Oh, yes.
So the next step, as Joan said, is for that, is to bring in some local artists to provide, see if there's a way to add to what the kids have already come up with, and then bring the students back if they're interested. And I think all 3 of them shared an interest that they would like to be part of this moving forward, and then seeing if a concept then could be devised to construct and raise funds for a sculpture that commemorates education and have it be housed on the kind of the entryway outside to the high school.
Mark?
Would the Fab Lab be an option for a prototype of what we're going to be doing?
Possibly.
That's actually what we talked about because of our foundry in there. If we could make, kind of a miniature of it.
That's a good idea.
It was, those are the concepts early on.
Anyway, very interesting. Any other presentations or events?
I went to the project graduation along with someone else, and volunteered at the last second to find whatever spots were open. But I gotta say, I was stunned by how
The energy at 4 o'clock.
yeah, the energy at 4 o'clock when they found who gets to get the moped and who gets the big screen TVs. You know, it's amazing how they get, I don't know how they chase down all these donations or how they come around, but it's definitely, talking with some people I know on school boards around Dane County, nobody else seems to be doing something on this scale. But they all thought it was a great idea. And I was surprised how many kids were there and how many of them, there was no real behavioral problem, nothing going on. They were all just having a great time, although the massage therapist, I think, was getting heavily utilized.
I think we had 250 students
Wow.
at
I see a
graduation.
big nod from Brian. Wow.
So what, about half the class?
No, that's,
No,
there were 270 in the class.
250 out of 370.
Wow.
That's, I just couldn't believe there were that many there when I got there. It was incredible.
Good evening.
Doing enough sugar and making.
They kept going and going and
They
going.
kept.
So what were they like the next day?
I don't know. I got out of there
They
at 4.
slept.
No, your daughter.
But you had one, you had a daughter.
Yeah, she was sleeping until
Yeah.
1 o'clock, I think.
I have a couple of things. First of all, a few of us had an opportunity to attend the engineering design and development presentations by students on kind of capstone projects. And I believe one of them is actually being presented at a national conference, Project Lead the Way, Skills USA National, that's moving on. But anyway, phenomenal projects that students had designed as part of their basically their capstone course in their Project Lead the Way group. So I'm thrilled that actually, and what's going to happen with the Innovation Center is some of the other resources that will be available to help facilitate even grander designs for that group is going to happen. So kudos to those students and congratulations to them for all their work. Also then, as I need to report on the CISA 2 conference that I represented this board at, actually the keynote speaker was most interesting. Joan Wade, who was previously with CISA 6, is now going to be the executive director of the Association of Ed Service Agencies. And so she did a presentation on what CISA's, what educational service agencies are. In Wisconsin, we have a community, a cooperative model, which is why it's called the CISA, the Cooperative Educational Service Agency. Other states have different models that they do that. And what's really neat as the executive director is that she's going to be advocating and supporting all of the national models around the country. There's like 45 states, 553 different agencies. How we do it in Wisconsin is on a cooperative basis, and that's a good model that people are starting to look at around the country. What's actually interesting is that she's also going to be working a little bit more with Tony Evers, who happens to be the chair this year of the Council of Chief State School Officers, as he's the board president of that organization. And so we will have some good Wisconsin representatives advocating with our national legislators on the part of important educational things going on, including ESSA rules writing. The one thing that I particularly appreciated about her presentation is that some of the comments that she made, which were really kind of sharing with other school board members, just talk that we need to make sure we talk more positively about our public schools if we want to be defeating the voucher movement. I mean, we tend to be a little bit more reactive and let outside issues kind of influence the dialogue. But there's, when we get into some of the topics like community engagement, and we've always talked about that at various times during usually our self-evaluations, what can we be doing more to promote what we're doing in our schools? Also, nationally, kind of a focus on equity is in terms of funding for students. One thing in particular that I found, an interesting story that she relayed was she herself was talking to some state legislators and advocating on the part of some physical therapy fund needs and all that. And one of the legislators said, well, why are you're involved in schools, and why would you be talking about funding for physical therapy? Well, this particular lawmaker didn't realize that what we do with physical therapists in our public schools and why it's important to be having resources available for supporting student needs of a variety of areas. Didn't realize that this is something which is also a public school issue. And so the more that we can be doing to share what's going on in public schools with legislators at the state and national level, the more informed they will be when it comes to helping us get access to the resources and give us the support for public education statewide. So anyway, it was actually really interesting to listen to her, wishing her luck. She'll stay in Wisconsin. We're working virtually, but it'll be good to have that voice representing Wisconsin at the national level. And that's it for my reports. Anybody else have anything? Okay. On to community engagement, item 2.
Just have Rebecca bring up our slides here. At the last meeting that we talked about, our linkage meeting follow-up and some of the dialogue that we had around that the last few months, I shared that I was going to bring some things back this summer for us to really have a dialogue and discussion around the table with. Looking in June here to look at how does our community want to receive information, or what are some of the topics of interest. July, looking at some of who our audiences are that we need to be communicating with. And then in August, coming back with the information that you provide over the next 2 months of worth of meetings, for us to really then just to look at an action plan that I'll draft to share with you at the August board meeting. But to start off with, when I first started looking at how to approach the community engagement aspect of our strategic plan, I was initially thinking about going and asking our community or our parents through Infinite Campus or another means, really a quick survey of how they want to be communicated with, etc. As I thought about it, though, we actually asked those questions in May of 14. We did that with our school perception survey, and then in the spring of 15, we did it through our linkage meetings. So I went back to that information, so that's really what's presented to you here. Board members, at your seat, you will see this, the 2-page memo that I included in board book. I think it's easier to read it off of there than trying to pull it up on your computer. And for the audience, I put it up on the screen. But you can see from our school perception survey, which was part of our referendum, we asked some just real basic questions that weren't related specifically to referendum topics. And one of those was, how do you want to learn about information that happens in the school district? So we had 2,100 respondents to this question. About 2/3 of them were individuals with kids in school, and about 1/3 were not. So you can see really where we range from email being of high importance, school district mailings, school district website, the Tribune, and then it falls off pretty quickly with text message. You have some different affiliations with social media, and ending with blogs at the bottom. And this was really just the simple question was, how do you want to receive information about what's happening in schools? So those was really the high level pieces that we received on our school perception survey. If you go over to the next slide, this is actually some information that we asked at our linkage meeting, a very similar type of a question. How do you want to receive information? How do you want to learn more about what's happening in the school district? Obviously, we were at a linkage meeting, so we were talking with the community, so obviously that came up as part of it, saying that linkage meetings that are focused on a specific topic. I think that was one piece that I heard, and that also a part that has a listening component, not just a learning component. So if we had meetings, however we want to title them, with the community, having them specific to a topic that also includes some pieces for us as a board and administration to listen. Talked about email for people with kids in school. I think we do a lot of that with Infinite Campus. That came forward. Newspapers and mailings for people without kids in school. And I think that those are some distinctions as we start looking at our audiences that we're communicating with in different ways that we can be thinking about that. Social media came up in this aspect from our linkage meeting. It's interesting when you pair that with our information from our survey. Social media was not a real high place for people to get information, but it certainly came up here. So I think that's one that's worth us having some discussion about as far as how do we want to position ourselves with the social media presence. Next one. Continuing on, these are just the same questions from the linkage meeting. Online surveys, some said that they liked that. If you remember at our linkage meeting, we were very specific to make sure we had a broad audience that we were working with. our ELL families felt very strongly that personal contact and written communication in their own language was important. And I think that was something that they brought a lot of value to that linkage meeting that we held in the spring of 15. And I think that's a real important piece for us to keep in mind as far as how do we communicate with the folks who don't speak English, and how does our strategy need to change as far as how we work with them. Obviously, the Waunakee Tribune came forward, district mailings and flyers, open houses at the schools. Next one, Rebecca. So those were the pieces as far as how do they want to get information. And then I also asked a question at our linkage meeting is, not only is it important to us to know how to get you information, but what are some of the things that you're interested in? And if you think back to our linkage meeting in spring of 15, we really covered we covered three main topics. Demographics of our school district, how is that changing and evolving over time? We talked about curriculum and what are we teaching our students? And then we talked about instruction, how are we delivering instruction to our students? And the topics that came back just from our exit survey were wanting to learn more about alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs and risky behaviors of students, post-high school placement and tracking, where do our graduates go, information on how we embrace diversity, mental health, student stress, anxiety, mental illness, how do we translate our district vision into practice. That was one of the topics we talked about at the linkage meeting. Student demographics, better understanding as far as who are the students that we are serving. Community growth and housing trends. This really goes to the whole growth aspect, and I think we've done a lot of work with that per referendums. Curriculum and instruction, I linked these together. What are we doing with teaching of civics? What does the 4K program look like, and what are some of the results we're receiving? Balancing college bound with those students who are going to work, going to the military, or choosing other options besides college after graduation. And then how do we balance our work with standards and assessment? Again, at-risk programs, differentiation of instruction, how do we work with students in special education, 504 pathways, and behavior and bullying. And so those were some of the topics that came up as per the exit survey that we had with our linkage meeting. And I thought for tonight, I know I went through those fairly quickly, but hopefully you had a chance to review them before you came tonight. But just really looking at the data that I went through from what we've collected over the last 2 years, I just have a few questions that I would like to use to just guide our discussion. Rebecca and I can take some notes and take your input, and then we can start to put that together as we formulate our action plans to be brought back in August. But the first question I have is what resonates with you regarding how people want to receive information. So this really goes to the first pieces of information that I covered was how do folks want to receive that information from the school district? What are some things that resonated with you as board members?
I think overriding from the top, what resonated with me, if the topic is truly community engagement, is that, to me, that implies two-way communication. So it's not a matter of us just burping out what we want them to know about what's going on, but it really is an opportunity to have a dialogue and exchange with what's going on in our community. What do our community members feel on a different topic? What are they experiencing? And what can we learn about how some of these topics are translating in their own lives? So to me, the whole idea that somehow there needs to be a two-way communication component to it is what rose to the top.
Mark?
I'd agree with that, but I also, it appeared to me that email mailings and the website seem to be a favored source of communication, and I would assume that's more for information about the district. For example, one of the topics in terms of post-secondary, what's happening. I mean, that's a summary report could probably be sufficient for that versus a linkage meeting. And so I think if we're going to have linkage meetings, we have to be mindful of the business of our community and make sure it's a topic that is truly of genuine interest that would that would pull people together to want to have a meeting versus be able to read about it in some format or other.
Joan?
What kind of resonated with me when I read this list is they are choosing what they're getting. So people who are getting email, choose email. You know, people who are reading the paper, choose the paper. So I agree with your two-way, but I also I think as a board, we have to realize how busy they are and what fits in their lives and what they're willing to give up and change behavior. You know, how do we change their behavior? Because they're just real happy with what we've done, because that's what they put down. You know, if it's email, it's like, how do you move the mountain? Because that's kind of what we have to do. They're just getting what they have.
Gary?
I think it's just, there's some things it's good to give out knowledge on, and then there's some things that it's good to get back and forth on. So, to Julie's point, turf would be a wonderful thing to give back and forth on. Because if we're gonna spend money on that, I'd love to know what everybody thinks on that. And there's a linkage meeting that you could have a meeting at and say, come talk to us. So it's more open to, but if you wanted to get into something else or talk about our school, we talked about it earlier, our alternative school, give information on that, which is something that you could have some change with, but I don't think a lot of people understand that we have that and that it's available and what we do for students that have problems. And not that you get into that, but to give them, that's where some of their money goes and how the school operates. I'm sure a lot of people see that other building and wonder what it's used for, or whatever. So there's some topics that just giving information would be great, and some topics such as turf would be a great one to open up and have go both ways, because I would like to see community input on that. And there's other topics I'm sure we can find.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think if people are satisfied with the product that they're giving, or that they're getting, we've got, our school district was always rated high in performance on the field and off the field and in the education. People tend to be satisfied. And to Joan's point, it's hard to change the mountain, move the mountain if the mountain is satisfied. But to Gary's point, I think there are topics like turf, like the Innovation Center, like some of these things that we want community involvement and engagement on, and those are the topics I think that you want to make sure, because you're not going to get a lot of people to meetings because people just don't do that.
You actually double dip to if you have a meeting and there is a discussion, there is a program on it, Pete's going to come cover it, and he's going to write an article, and away you go. So then you're going to get that too.
Well, it's not just us holding meetings though, too. I mean, again, I'm thinking back to what we did for the referendum, and we talked at the time, we took our presentations to meetings other people were already going to. So whether it's the Senior Citizen Center or the Rotary Club or some of these other venues, it speaks both to Peggy's point about how that gives us a chance to tell our story of the good things that we're doing, but also to give some insight and perspective on some of the challenges that perhaps we could use some community help and engagement with, such as shortage of substitute teachers. And maybe there's people in our community who didn't know what a struggle that is on a day-to-day basis for us. And maybe there would be more people willing to raise their hand and participate in that kind of program. There's just a whole host of resources that I think community members would be willing to do to help us if they knew there was a need. So it's not always us creating the meeting. Sometimes it's us going out to their meetings.
Yeah, facilitating discussion. Dave? I echo a lot of what everybody said. I mean, that's really kind of dependent. I do think listening sessions around a single topic that we're either trying to get input around, and I know that, you know, one of the next questions, I'm like the student well-being and ATODA. I mean, there are certain things going on that I think would be, that kind of a forum works well for information exchange and sharing. But also, I think there's probably some room for improvement in how we tend to, you know, how our district website's operating. Because a lot of people will also, you know, want to say, hey, I didn't, you know, tell me about this, give me search capabilities or whatever. I mean, that's how some people actually find information that they might be interested in. And I know we've usually got something already put together. It's just a matter of making people know that it's there or give them access to it. So, I mean, I agree that we don't want, it's really tough to change behavior unless there's a motivation for them to want to learn something different. So I think it really depends on the topic and the issue that we're seeking information on.
Kind of following up on that, we've
Just before you go on, is there a way that you could, you know, 71% of your respondents want email. Can you put a link, a YouTube link in there, you know, for things so that you know, you can make it more visual?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and just an email.
I think you actually have the ability with that camera right back there, because I think it can zoom in so nice and close, and it can catch everything you're saying.
Still on the camera there?
That's right. It's still on the camera, Jack. It's right on. Exactly. He can move it around.
these right to their house.
No, but that's a good point. We've talked about that, as trying to
Which
take
is
some of
already
our
in.
messages
Yes.
that we send out and make them more multimedia type things.
Right.
Are there ways that people who aren't necessarily parents of students, I mean, the 71% mentions, you know, the number of people, you know, who are representative of the parents. I mean, maybe there are people who are willing to share their email address or something with us, that whenever we're doing something, we add them to the list. So.
Just moving on, it's really just a continuation of that. Where do you think, given what we've learned about, what we just talked about, of how we can share information and learn from our community, what do you think we're doing a good job with, and where are some areas that we need to improve? Just thinking across the district as far as how we do this aspect, where can we improve on it? Peggy started off with some things about the website.
Well, my number one thing I listed for doing well, I think we're exceptional with electronic information, with Infinite Campus, the website. In the same breath, I look at the website and there's so much information there, you almost have to be a private investigator to find what you're looking for.
It's very,
It can be buried, and I mean, it's organized really well, but still, if we're looking for something specific, what, you know, vision, for where do you find the vision? You know, and
Right.
or that, it's just one example, and staff directory. I mean, it's, you know, each school has a different location for it, and so it's there. But how do you find something meaningful that you really want, and is there a way for us to perhaps highlight 4 things that we think are really of value this year? And one of them may be the academic report, you know, as an example. I know it's there, but is there a way to make it, you know, highlight 1, 2, 3, or 4 things, maybe even quarterly, so that it's, you know, it's easier to find versus, you know, a subset of a subset.
I actually think the website has improved immensely in consistency from school to school. It used to be just so, every school was set up so differently. I couldn't navigate. I mean, I'd look for a teacher and I couldn't find him. But I think there is a lot more consistency, so whoever is working on those web pages, I think that they're much, much, much better. I like your idea of, again, I don't know, I have tried to do a search on the website with little success. I don't know if that is a possibility.
Yeah, the search part is.
The search part doesn't work
Not so
very
great.
well. That might help.
And I guess I think we do a better job with parents than we do with non-parents. So again,
Yes.
I would encourage some improvement with that. For example, you know, I've always kind of wanted something that's like this week in Waunakee schools, where that's a tab you could click on and you could see at Arboretum on Tuesday, they're doing a character thingy. On, you know, this school on Wednesday, there's the band concert. We have these calendars, but when you click on them, they either give you too much or too little. I think the more things we could make the community aware of, we want you to drop in and see what's going on with this kind of thing. But
I really think that those district calendars were very, very valuable. And I know that it got
the hard copy
so
ones?
massive, those hard copy, I mean, that used to be just like the Bible. And they are hard to find in the web pages. Like you said, what's happening, to find a sporting event, you gotta
where are they? Yeah,
call my
exactly.
sister, when are they playing?
And some of those calendars you click on now, it has like lap swim at the pool. Well, I mean, I don't care about lap swim at the pool. I'm not wondering what's reserved for the facilities. I'm wondering, where are students doing things? Who's playing where? What?
Like just a student activity.
True, but
Yeah.
the community thing where somebody's not involved with the school, they do carry laps over the pool.
Well, that's true. I'm not saying you should
No,
delete it,
you
but
know what
what
I'm
I'm saying is,
But maybe a student activity
Yes.
calendar that can be hard printed, and I know that that's expensive, and I'm not even sure why that ever left. Why did we get rid of that, Brian? Do you know?
because it was expense, I think.
I didn't know we got to that. I do think it was more the cost aspect of things than anything else.
Well, I agree with that. We're going electronic with everything
I was
else. If
gonna
you
say,
can
young
find
people
it, you
don't
go
use
look
paper,
at it.
it's,
That wouldn't
But
say
it's the
that.
taxpayers one.
Well, maybe
you had
then
a-
we just need to simplify the school
Yeah.
calendar, the websites.
Dave, had your hand up?
The one thing I noticed is when you look at this list of what people at the linkage meeting were saying they would be interested in, it's a list of problems. It's a list of difficulties the school district has, from the ATODA to dealing with diversity to mental health to demographics to growth in housing trends to at-risk programs. I mean, there's only maybe two things that don't fall into that category. People are interested in problems not because they just want to hear how bad you are or anything, but they're concerned. I mean, we have a great school district that does really well in every academic area, but they want to know where the problems are. And people come to a meeting not to hear how great things are and receive a feel-good report. They come to a meeting because they're worried something's going on and they want to know what they can or should or might want to do about it. That's what draws people in. And I think when we look at this, we have to remember that, is that we need to get them to be interested, and I hate to say it, they're more interested in where the problems are and what they can fix. Perfect example is the Warrior Stadium. People know it has some issues. So if you did a meeting saying, let's talk about what can we do to make Warrior Stadium better, whether it's the concept of the turf and dealing with the sign and dealing with the bleachers and all that, people are going to come to that because there's something to really be directly involved in. The growth thing, Steve and I were talking about how business development in the community actually hurts the school district financially because of the school aid formula. Most people don't know that, but it is something that's going to come, especially as we seem to be creating bigger TIF districts, and when they close, all of a sudden the school aid formula inverts and we lose money. And when we lose money, the property taxes go up. So people have to realize that. How do you deal with that? That's probably part of the growth issue. But I think the big thing we have to realize is if you want community involvement, you got to give them something they want to be involved in. And those are the types of issues they're going to care about. And that's when they're going to show up. So I just think we need to maintain a strong awareness of the issues we pick in that sense.
Or be more upfront in the help that we're asking for. Be
Yeah.
more specific in the kinds of help we're looking for, there's need for. Ways you can volunteer.
I guess the harsher way to say it is, no one's going to come to the PAC to hear a presentation on how great the grades are of the seniors this year. Nobody's going to show up. But if you sit there and say, here's the problem with, the at-risk programs, some people will show up for that. And I guess we just have to be aware of it.
That was my point, Julie, that there's some things you just put out there. Here's some things you could help with the school if you had an interest and a talent.
That's right. Yeah.
And then you just put that out there and you'll get people that are interested in that. But to Dave's point, then you find other issues where we're struggling with something or they're gonna have to pay because of what it is. That's what you get them a shortfall.
Jack? Yeah, and I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, in terms of, it really depends on the topic, and if there are the things, as Dave said, I think that, well, first of all, if the question I remember also was, what are we doing good? I don't know, there are some people who like the hard copy, they turn to the paper, and I don't know if we're ever interested in bringing back a new and improved time publication. Or we've talked a variety of times whether or not we need to have every once in a while just kind of a column in the newspaper. And just
I think
that, and then what you have to do is set up a schedule and then make sure you have topics identified ahead of time and then put it in them. So I think that those are having little things like that every once in a while that are more informative or FYI-ish, kind of get people thinking a little bit, and maybe then it increases their awareness and attention to the next news that's going to come up, or want to participate more in a discussion that is a specific topic like youth risks survey does, which I think is an important one. So. Anything else on this one?
The last two questions I think we can actually probably do together, and really what we're getting at is, it starts to go to what Dave started to discuss is, what are the topics? And as we're starting to look at some of the things in planning for the next year, what are some topics that really resonate with you that people want to hear about? And then what are some areas that you think that we should be considering as we start to put some focus to the next year? And are there any things that are missing? I mean, this was input that was gathered obviously from a linkage meeting with about less than 40 people present. Are there some topics that obviously we've been working around that you feel are pressing that we should be focusing on? So what resonates with you as far as topics we should look at for the next year that we should highlight in some way, shape, or form through some of the different methods we've talked about?
I think one in particular would be kind of tying into, I think, other discussions on the youth risk assessment surveys. That was Daycon Youth, that survey. But in a community dialogue around some of the things, I know there was a period of time when there was a lot of community interest in what's going on. And it popped up 4 different times in different ways in this list. Kind of student well-being. What are we doing to help deal with mental health or at risk of being or bullying? And all, I think it all kind of comes out of those types of surveys and the climate things that we do. And it involves maybe other organizations that are interested in working to help support not necessarily what's happening in the schools, but support the families, so which can actually influence then some of those issues that are coming to us in the schools.
Here you brought up the Warriors.
Turf for Warrior Stadium, I think that's one. The other one that was brought up was the alternative school, which fits in with what you're talking about somewhat. I think still our plan and following up to what we've done and how it's working, if it's hitting where it's going, what our numbers are, how are the projections, if they're hitting the projections of what we've had for students coming in, how Bishop's Bay is developing, how Kilkenny, all those, to follow up what people gave us input on the last time.
I guess when I look down at all these issues and stuff, there seems to be almost 2 paths. And the tough part is, how much do you cram into something you're trying to do, because you don't want the thing to turn into a 4-hour long problem. But it seems like one is facility. In other words, our buildings versus our growth versus, the hard dollar, hard physical stuff of Warrior Stadium, versus growth in student population versus how many schools we have and where are they going to be. People care about that usually very strongly, which is why you see great referendum participation. Then the other side is student behavior within the schools, whether it's drug-related, whether it's bullying, whether it's mental health, whether it's diversity. It's more the student interactions within the school district, no matter what grade level it's at. It seems like those are the two paths that people most care about. And the question would become, what do you create as far as an outreach program around that? I mean, I remember what was that program they used to do in the elementary schools? I'm guessing they're still doing it, where they bring someone in to talk about the how to raise your kid thing, about whether you're a helicopter parent and all that. What's that program called?
Positive parenting.
I can't remember what it was. I assume they're still doing that?
In different places, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that brought in more parents than I saw at our annual school board meeting, that's for sure. So, like I said, it just seems like those are the two paths people care about.
Mark?
Well, and I don't think there's a bad topic on there, but I think we have to be realistic and say, okay, just like we're looking at our strategic plan, there are some things we're just going to do without making it the focal point. What's the one thing that maybe is most urgent this year, and that becomes a focus, and next year we can pick another topic. One of the things, Dave, I think you hit the nail on in terms of what are the things that people are interested in. But as an example, I have community growth down here in housing, but at this point, does that require, is there an urgency to have a meeting about it, or could we have sort of an annual info piece that goes out about, we built these schools, we've had these additions on, here's the growth projections now, and this is how we're meeting them with the facilities we have, so that when it comes time to have the public meeting, people aren't surprised by how the population grows and how it's filling into our schools. I think it's a piece that people probably need to hear about, probably on an annual basis, but not necessarily meet every year about it.
The other one would be something we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is kind of, well, the role of curriculum, co-curricular, I mean, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of people who are engaged in both in various ways, shapes, or forms, and I think a community dialogue around something, around that particular issue might help.
Wonderful.
Is that what you wanted?
That's exactly what I was looking for. Any final comments before we move on? Excellent. Thank you very much. That's very helpful. So next month, what we'll talk about is some of our publics that we need to be communicating with, and then from that, we'll move forward into August with bringing back at least a draft action plan to get some feedback. Awesome. Thank you.
Randy, did you have that innovation center?
Yes, I have that on there too. Yep.
Would it be of any value to do an informal, or a non-binding vote on topics that we would feel are, so we get kind of a sense where the board is on priorities for the public linkage?
It's something.
Well, maybe once you draw up that list, we could all rank
Rank
them in
right.
order and add one or two more if we thought of them, kind of thing.
Yep.
Might get us more focus when we come in at the next meeting.
All right. Sounds like a plan. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, next item on the agenda. This is just more informational, although we do need to act on two of them. In your packet are the committees and other appointed positions. As I mentioned in the memo, I really tried to balance everyone's interests by giving everyone number one and number two preferences. No individuals got something they ranked number 7, availability, and so we've got some more flexibility. So some of the changes, you see, I've been given the okay that it's like, okay, yeah, I think I can go there. I think I'm going to be able to attend those meetings at those times. Conflicts of interest and experience in different committees when possible. So I really tried to honor everybody's information that they provided. And I had some other comments in the memo with respect to goals. I think that, there's a question, nobody really wanted to be on it, but, well, actually, I kind of did, and then a couple people did 6 and the rest did 7, so that's the committee. Yeah?
So related to that topic and dovetailing into what we just talked about, I do
Yeah.
have to say, I'm really thrilled that I'm still on the curriculum committee. It is where my passion and my interest lies, and I hope to continue to contribute positively in that area. On the other hand, I was really kind of disappointed and upset to be chair of the goals committee for a 3rd year in a row. I think I have very publicly acknowledged, I think my leadership has not been very helpful in chairing this committee over the last 3 years. But after talking to Randy about it a little further, I think he shares somewhat of the view. His first thought was that this committee perhaps should be disbanded. And I think we're on the same page, because my view, this is more properly framed. I appreciate the work Jack has done to try to move us away from talking goals and objectives and more framing it as strategic planning work. And I think all of that work is best done as a committee of the full board. I think we will do our best work when we get more input from more people on that. So I'm taking the really short straw. I get it. I'm going to do my best, but my intent and my goal for that committee would be that we never meet in committee, but only as additional meetings of the board as a whole. And I also hope we can tie it somewhat, instead of just integrating individual department and chair head goals and building goals, into something that gives us a means of measuring whether we're really moving the needle on student achievement or not. So I think whatever it is that we come up with, I hope there are things that we can measure. And somehow I see this work too as being tied to our redevelopment of our tools for evaluation, both for the superintendent and for the board as a whole. So that's my thoughts on it. I'll do my best, but I'm telling you, I don't think this is committee work, this is board work. I value all 7 of these lenses, and there's no way I can drive that boat by myself. So,
And that's that's really why it's going to take a different dialogue and maybe a new and improved or changed or
That's right.
whatever, and I agree with you completely. And I will be happy to share after the meeting how basically chairs happen, because there's some that have to be, it's a matrix, and you got to figure out, how it works to figure out who is going to be able to be chair, and it just depends on the committees you're assigned to as well, so. Anyway, any other comments on committee assignments? The one thing that we do need to do, because it's in the policies for both WASB and CISA, is that I have myself as the CISA 2 delegate. We kind of decided that before, actually, at this point. And then for WASB delegate, we do need to take action on those as a board, because that's identified in the policies of those 2 organizations. So if we can have a motion with respect to those 2 individuals, that would be wonderful.
I move we approve the delegates for CISA 2 and WASB.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, and thank you for your input, Julie. We already did the curriculum presentation. On to the CISA 2 service contract.
In your packet, you will find a copy of the contract for CISA 2 for this next school year. The total is just over $19,000. The only items that we purchased through CISA are the ones that are listed and highlighted in blue. So the other items are just listed there as part of just their general contract, but we don't take part in those services. Most of these are with regards to our student services staff and different resources and opportunities that are available to them through CISA 2, which we utilize for the service of the kids. So my recommendation would be approval.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jack, seconded by Mark. Any comments, questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Finance reports?
Thank you, Peggy. In the board book, you'll find the 3 typical monthly financial reports, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have about any of those 3 reports.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Motion by Jack, second by Joan. Any questions, comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Pupil transportation.
In your board book packet, you saw a copy of the proposed pupil transportation handbook for the 16-17 school year. These handbooks are distributed to all students through the student handbook process. We did highlight in yellow the proposed changes from last year so they'd be easier to see. Just want to talk about them for a moment. The first item that you see in yellow is really due to the move of the intermediate school to Woodland Drive. And so now you'll see the eligibility for transportation is 1.75 miles from Eldora Lane and Woodland Drive. Previously, it used to be along Knightsbridge and South Street. So that's a change for the intermediate school. We've defined what streets are hazardous. We added that just so the public would be aware and parents would be aware of what those streets are. On the next page, at the very bottom of page 2, we've clarified more specifics about when a parent wants to request an alternate location for their student to be dropped off before and or after school due to daycare reasons. So that's number 9, just provide a little more specific. And then number 11 was based on input from the budget committee and discussions regarding the contract for the 16-17 year. We had discussed publicizing when the drop-off times are really there in the morning, what's considered on time, what isn't, and then having a tracking mechanism established on a daily basis and then reporting out so that we would be able to look at percentages of on-time drop-offs for each of those schools. So for the first time, we're really publicly defining for parents in the community what those on-time drop-offs are considered now for all of the schools. And those have been determined in conjunction with the start times as Randy had previously presented to the board. And I believe that was the last item in yellow. Yes, that's the last item in yellow. So I'd be open to any questions or comments.
Where?
Reading through it, I just wondered if it would be of value to the community with number 11 to also identify anticipated pickup point at the end of the school day. So we're having a drop-off time, but would it be worth listing when we expect the kids to be picked up at each site as a help to the parents to know when that would happen to be?
Yeah, absolutely. We could certainly add that to number 11. That would provide more information as well, and I think that'd be a helpful addition. So we can make that change and add that piece along to number 11.
And
You're not done, go ahead.
the other question I had was in regard to the listing of examples of major rule violations. And I was a little bit concerned that, although in reviewing, I do see it's listed in number 7, I thought it probably ought to be listed with examples of major rule violations, harassment, verbal, physical, and in light of what we had a year ago, I guess I'm just wondering if it's clear that physically mushing people, or I don't know how you'd phrase it, is an example of a major violation. And if it ought to be included in these examples.
So you're looking for some more specific clarification on some of the major infractions. Okay, we can do that.
You mean like, so even like on number 7, you could have maybe a few other verbs in the, you have hitting, punching, kicking, maybe social, I mean, that's, maybe there's ways to add.
Physical intimidation, of some sort.
Because that's where verbal threatening and kind of is as well.
Absolutely.
I was the only one, and maybe it's just me, I was having trouble reading the list of hazardous streets. Main Street, Division Street, State Highway Q, and then the next one says south of Woodland Drive. What does that mean?
Isn't that the Kilkenny district?
Did they mean Woodland Drive south of Q? Is all of Woodland Drive?
All of Woodland Drive between Q and Division Street, so I can see what you're saying. Yes, it's not all of Woodland Drive. It's defined within the box of Main, Division, and Q.
I thought State Highway Q is one of the streets, right?
It is.
So then we're talking about something else, and the next piece says south of Woodland Drive.
It's
What's-
south of Woodland Drive, in between Highway Q and Division.
Okay,
But
then
now
I would
it would
say
be on
Woodland
website.
Drive between
Right.
Q and Division.
Right.
Yeah,
So Woodland
yeah,
Drive would
yeah.
just be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we can reword that.
Yeah, thank you.
It's not State Highway Q, is it?
County
Yeah,
Q.
it's County Highway Q.
Yep, we can reword that. Thank you.
Any other?
I'm just curious, they just come out and decide what are nuisance roads, or how do you get that?
It was a very long time ago. Highway 113 was defined when Arboretum Elementary School was built. The rest of the roads were all deemed hazardous prior to when I started in 2001. So it's been a number of years. It's been like that for over 15 years.
So they changed the sheriff that made this decision in that time?
Shoot that.
It's not really made by the sheriff, is my understanding. It's made based on traffic count. They take traffic count
I
at
understand.
certain speeds, and then they say it becomes hazardous above a certain amount of cars going past the point at a certain speed.
At a
in time.
certain speed, that's why the Division to Q thing, because that's where the speed limit changes. That section is faster.
Yeah, 35
Yeah. Okay. that makes
Plus you
sense.
pick up the extra vehicles of Division coming onto the river.
And then the new stuff. new
And
roads
yet,
coming
on
in.
Division, we have no crossing guards anywhere.
Mhm.
Never thought of that till now, but we don't.
Because it's pretty far from the school.
Where?
We used to have one.
There isn't really a crossing there, that's why.
There used to be.
Well, there could be a crossing up by,
Up by the what's the road that
Wexford.
cuts, yeah, Wexford.
whatever the other road is
Knightsbridge, yeah.
there, but there
I
isn't.
used to walk there and he would help me.
Yeah.
Okay, any other comments or clarification? I mean, do we have to approve this now for printing, or is there, you want to bring back a revised version
Yeah.
based on?
Good question. This does go into the student handbooks that you then receive next month.
Okay,
And I would just request approval to make these modifications along with the other changes that you had, and we'll make the updates.
Motion to approve.
Second.
motion by Dave, seconded by Mark. Any other comments?
With modifications.
Okay,
as-
with the modifications.
Yes.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right.
Opposed? Motion carried. Dean Health presentation. This is information only, right? Okay.
Information only. Thank you, Peggy. Tonight we have a featured speaker. I think most of you have had an opportunity in the past to know Al Jaeger. For those of you who don't, Al Jaeger works for Associated Financial Group. Al is a benefits consultant and has worked in the district for many years. Al is a part of a larger project with CISA 2. So many school districts within CISA 2 partner together with Associated Financial Group to work towards improvements collectively in the area of health benefits with many of the providers in the area. We asked Al to be present tonight to really give a high-level overview of what we've accomplished in the last year, what we really have going on in the next year, and just some updates and some, overview on some of the Affordable Care Act pieces that we're really keeping our eye out there on that probably won't take effect for a few years, but is really affecting the decisions that we're really trying to make today. So Connie and I are going to turn it over to Al, and then we'd be happy at the end to answer any questions that you might have about the various topics that Al's going to cover. So there you go, Al. Take it away.
Thank you. Good evening. As far as the presentation overview, the objective is to kind of give you a sense of, I guess, the bigger picture of all the different trends. And if I can figure out how to work this, we'll get into it. Did I hit something wrong? No. So from the foundation of planning, there's several different items to bear in mind when we're looking at benefit trends, looking at benefits in general from a decision standpoint. So we'll go through the foundation of planning, the equations to remember, the different trends that we're seeing from cost drivers, the various approaches that are being assessed, and then from a compliance standpoint, the Affordable Care Act and how that plays into your decision-making process and overall next steps. When you look at the three spheres on the right-hand side, cost, compliance, and culture, as the agenda touched on, cost is certainly one of the things that we need to keep an eye on in terms of what the trends are and what's driving those costs. From a compliance standpoint, that's the Affordable Care Act, and there's some pieces in that compliance category that create a perfect storm with the culture. Culture meaning, since Act 10, there's certainly been a change in how things are done within school districts throughout the state, especially. And when we're talking about, I'll say the history of health insurance within school districts, historically speaking, being a collectively bargained benefit, the main thought there was $1 in benefits is worth more than $1 in pay. This is where the biggest category of cultural change has taken place in the world of benefits for school districts. And we in Wisconsin are hit much harder than the states surrounding us, whether it be Minnesota or Illinois, and I'll speak to that further, what I mean by that. So from a cost standpoint, from an insurance premium, when we talk about a premium, 90% of our premiums are our claims. Why is that important? We'll get into that, but ultimately what drives our premium costs? Claims. When we look at the history of what we've done here at the district, plan design, provider network, and premium are the three decision-making buckets, and we've made changes, whether it's been from what provider networks we offered. We used to have both the UW system and Dean featured. Now we just have the Dean featured. Plan design, we used to have, from the standpoint of complete freedom of choice, we now have HMO plans featured. We also have additional co-pays. And from a premium standpoint, that's certainly one of the key categories too. The health insurance industry, or benefits healthcare in general, is one of the only industries each and every year, kind of like death and taxes you can count on. Well, you can also count on the healthcare cost increasing every year. This is something we continue to look at, as Steve indicated, throughout CISA 2 and certainly within our district. And some of the inflation costs noted. One of the biggest dynamics we're challenged with in Wisconsin, cost shifting. What does that mean? When we have a high percentage of Medicare and Medicaid recipients going to our local provider systems, they're getting paid 25 cents on the dollar for their claims. What's that translate to in Wisconsin? Because we have the lowest reimbursement in Medicare and Medicaid, it means when the providers get billed from those of us that are on private plans, like the district staff, they cost shift to them to make up for the fact that in Wisconsin, Medicare and Medicaid has such low reimbursement. So some key pieces there. Intensity of services, that's another dynamic. Best example I can use, when I was young, if I thought, or my parents thought I broke my leg, I'd get an x-ray. What's an x-ray cost? Not much, less than $50, $60. Now what do? You get an MRI. What's that cost? anywhere from $700 to $4,000. So those are some of the reasons for increased costs. Next slide, the Affordable Care Act. You'll see anywhere from 2017, we have a moratorium on certain costs. Without going into a long description of why, I'll just say we've seen cost since the exchanges started in 2014 that range from $163,000 all the way up to projected in 2018 of $262,000. That pays for a lot of things like subsidies that individuals get, lower income on the exchange, risk adjustment fees, just the exchange, and some of the administrative costs in general. So when we look at the history, we went from, many of you may remember, we were on a WEA's front-end deductible plan, the indemnity plan. That's on the far left. We're now on the right side of the equation on an HMO. Why is that? While we're compressing what providers we see, we get better pricing, pure and simple. One of the things that's revisited throughout CESA 2 each and every year is, as we continue to move to more consumerism, frankly, a common discussion is, why don't we get out of this insurance gig? Why don't we just take the money that's spent on insurance, put it into pay? That's the far end of the spectrum. I'm here to tell you it's not a good deal, and I don't see that happening in the near future. However, if and when single payer comes into play, that's when I think the wages only may very well be part of the discussion and become more prevalent in the culture. So the spaghetti graph, this is something that since 2002 throughout CESA 2, we take snapshots of various districts and try to compare and contrast, not just a 1 year snapshot, but you'll see 10 to 15 years, and see what the trends are and why certain districts are doing certain things. And we really dive into the details in each and every one. You'll see Waunakee, we've been in the middle for the most part throughout the time period. And in the end, we take that all into consideration with all the details we're going into. And not only do we look at from a pricing standpoint, the details you see on this snapshot speaks to present day, some of the peers that we look at, whether it's Middleton, Monona Grove, DeForest, yourself, Sun Prairie, etc. And the purpose of that is we look at plan design, we look at contribution, we look at eligibility, we look at wellness. Those are the 4 levers when looking at strategic planning. Biggest part of our discussions moving forward, you can do, when you're dealing with benefit planning, you can do a couple of different things. Pay less of the claims. What's that mean? You increase deductibles or co-pays. Pay less for the claims. What's that mean? As you move down the provider spectrum, you negotiate better pricing with the provider systems. Or have fewer claims. What's that mean? Wellness. How do we have fewer claims? How do we promote wellness? And in the end, uncontrolled behaviors equals higher healthcare costs. As I mentioned earlier, 90% of your premium are your claims. And behavior represents 50% of the determinants of your health. What's that translate to? We can impact almost half of our claims. One of the key things that, as Steve indicated once earlier, from a CESA 2 initiative, especially the Dane County districts, really have banded together from I'll call it a clinic model standpoint. And in the end, what's different about this than standard initiatives? You really have somebody that's focused within just the district for the district staff, and their family members, and focusing on things like not only the wellness, to follow up on wellness. You indicated, for example, mental health from the students. Well, one of the things more and more districts are paying more attention to, employee assistance program for mental health from the staff member standpoint. Coordinating with the local primary care, prescription drugs, and overall consumerism. Couple quick points here. We laid out a multi-year progression, and what we're not doing is looking at year by year and just doing short-term fixes. We're trying to develop a progressive wellness initiative, and we've looked at case studies. We've been involved, we AFG / in our prior world, Javis, prior to 2004, we've been involved in developing many of these wellness and clinic models and have effectively developed over 20 different clinic models and many with districts. In that progression, you'll see a lot of it's focused on biometrics. A lot of it's focused on identifying benchmarking in not only collective health but individual health. And a lot of it's focused on just controlling the cost. And the overall spectrum from a wellness standpoint, you can have learning or you can have achieving. And in the end, our objective is to move more toward the achieving than just learning from an engagement. One of the key things we're seeing as much in Sheboygan has been one of the districts that's had a clinic and has seen as much as 29% from an employee savings standpoint and certainly a similar level from a district savings. Real quick, why is this important? Well, not only from your own cost and culture standpoint, but when we look at the Affordable Care Act, some of the key two details, we go through each year for the district about a 41-point audit from a compliance standpoint. Two key components, one is pay or play, the other is the Cadillac Tax. For purposes of this discussion, I'll focus on Cadillac Tax. What is it? I'll describe the Cadillac Tax as the IRS's way of saying, look, we need cash. We have employers throughout the country that have in their compensation model a compensation / health insurance that we never get our hands on from a federal government standpoint. We need some, we want to start taxing it. Little known secret, they could remove all their debt / financial issues if they taxed health insurance 100%. They'd take care of all their problems. They didn't go quite to that extreme, but what they did do, and one of the indicators you may recall when they limited how much you could put into flex, that was kind of an indicator that they're going to start doing something to this effect. Now what they're saying is any dollar amount spent on a single individual from health insurance, from the district and the employee's contribution, along with flex spending and HSAs and HRAs, over $10,200, every dollar over that, we're going to ding you for 40%. So for every dollar over, we're going to charge you 40 cents. And on the family, every dollar over $27,500, we're going to ding you 40 cents. Originally, that was scheduled for that dollar amount in 2018. It's now scheduled to be in effect in 2020. So back to one of the questions, do we just get out of the insurance gig? This is just a quick part of our audit, and we look at, and the bottom line is, on the right-hand side, you're spending, call it $5.1 million as a district. On the left-hand side, it would cost north of $6.5 million to remain competitive. You go back to the fundamental question, why do you offer health insurance? To attract and retain quality staff. In order to maintain somewhat near competitiveness, you'd be talking about $1.5 million more just to be competitive. A couple more details on the Cadillac Tax. This breaks down the details of the Cadillac Tax. In the end, if we project forward at an 8% medical trend, on the right-hand side, a couple columns, you see the 10,200 in 2018 single, 27,500 family. That's indexed at general inflation. Call that 2.7%, please.
Why do we care about this? Are we offering a Cadillac plan?
Based on the definition of the IRS, the threshold listed out by the IRS by 2020, which is when it comes into effect, yes, we have a problem.
By then, not now.
When you project forward, we will then, yes. We don't. The law's not in effect yet. The 2020 Cadillac Tax is not in effect.
Saying for the threshold that they have now, if we keep our premiums keep increasing, we'll hit. That's what you're saying.
Correct. So instead of waiting till 2020 and realize we're way over, we need to start thinking about it now so we don't have to be as extreme come 2020. This is how we as districts throughout the state, over 100, are looking at, hey, we need to start planning now. Because if we don't, we're going to have an ugly surprise if we're not prepared.
Am I mistaken in thinking that the reason it's called a Cadillac tax is that it provides more luxury than
Yeah,
what the
unfor-
average American is getting in their plan? Is that a misnomer?
It is absolutely and unfortunately a misnomer. I mean, the reality is, we're very, and I know we don't feel that way in Dane County, but when I'm working in Eau Claire, when I'm working in La Crosse or Milwaukee, they have $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 deductible plans, and their rates are higher than ours, and they're going to get ding worse on the Cadillac tax, even though their plan design stinks, relatively speaking, compared to ours. So it has nothing to do with how high of a quality of a plan it is. It has everything to do with how much it costs for the care in that their geography. So it is a disproportionate, or I'll say unfair, assessment of how it's assessed throughout the.
And it's higher here because we
It's
have.
low. It's lower. Our premiums are substantially lower here than other parts of the state. So we don't have near the problem that other parts of the state do.
Okay, Mark had a question.
Okay, but you said they're indexing it to inflation, even though the rate of increase is double, triple, quadruple inflation.
Everyone's going to have a problem for that exact dynamic. I mean, remember early when one of my first slides, I talked about medical trend being one of the definites? That's the reality. Since the law came out in 2010, I've been explaining that there's going to be two parts to this. First, it's going to be insurance reform. Next, it's going to be provider reform. The provider reform issue goes back to why is La Crosse so much higher than Dane County? They have a higher percentage of Medicare and Medicaid reimbursements in a lot of those other geographies than we do in Dane County. So as a result, they have less cost shifting going on. And as a result, they're getting penalized much more significantly, no fault of their own. So they're having to do things. The reason we have clinic models in other parts of the state set up for a decade or longer is they've had to, out of financial need, do this long ago.
Well, another question, if you don't mind.
Please.
You said a lot of the cost increases because of the Medicare payment. So in the state of Wisconsin, is it because of the decision not to accept more Medicare coverage from the federal government to cover the cost?
Yeah.
About 2 years ago, I read where the Medicare payout is based upon 18% over the hospital cost. And yet, I'm hearing that it's not sufficient to meet the cost, so was that a phony number? That was from Time Magazine when they did the 15-page expose in Medicare.
The
and
issue
hospital
predated.
bills.
Yeah, the issue predated a lot of it was relatively recent Wisconsin decisions. So there's a little. It really goes back to how Medicare determines the state reimbursement schedule, and I honestly can't tell you why Wisconsin has such a low reimbursement schedule, but that's been going on for a couple decades.
Okay.
Dave, did you have a question?
Oh, I was just on your question. I deal with our union insurance a lot, and we're self-insured.
Sure.
So we get into kind of a different version. But my understanding is on the Medicare, that did not change how much anyone's getting paid in Wisconsin. All it decided was who was paying the bill. So by turning it down, it just became, instead of the federal government footing a part of the bill, now Wisconsin taxpayers will foot a part of the bill. But the cost shifting aspect is still there no matter who paid the bill. So it didn't really affect this calculation. Thank you.
So, any other questions just in the unfortunate realities we have with the thresholds of the Cadillac tax that are in place? Okay, so, I mean, there may be, the second plan we have is a point of service plan. While the enrollment is much lower in the point of service, the threshold issue becomes more significant because it's more expensive. So that just plays out in this demonstration. So
Go back, but aren't we HMO, not a POS?
we have both. So the focus.
Well, by choice, they can
buy up to the
POS.
point of service.
Okay.
And even though the staff member may be paying the difference up, the
It affects
IRS
their
doesn't
tax rate.
care because they're paying the difference in pre-tax dollars, and the IRS doesn't like the non-tax dollars. So some of the additional dynamics taking place put aside for a second just the whole Affordable Care Act. And one of the things driving our cost, we have high claims, relatively speaking, and based on the renewal calculation came in at 22% this coming year. The good news is we negotiated a cap of 5%. We'll continue to have that 5% for 2 more years, and in that process we also have some additional incentives we need to build in from a participating in health assessment standpoint.
When you say we have high claims, you mean Waunakee School District?
The district population. To respond to some of those challenges I had touched on earlier, we consolidated all the membership. In the past we had dual offered, both Dean and Unity. We consolidated to Dean to get this multi-year agreement. And in addition to that, there's some incentives from the health participation standpoint, or I should say biometric/wellness participation standpoint. And the health system, the Dean Health System, had agreed to various clinic models that throughout CESA 2 they're working with us to develop and evolve to. And a lot of it again is truly focused on the population health of the district. Some of the different items: wellness, prevention, early intervention, chronic condition management. Those are all parts of the wellness focus. Stabilize your healthcare expenditures, seeking to front-end additional care, front-end care, and additional access. So improve access to the right care, stabilize healthcare expenditures, improve health status would be, the overall well-being, nurse coaching, and clinic offering progression. One of the individuals that the district has started to get to know is Tyler. Tyler's within the Dean system, and he's specifically been involved with the various wellness committee and the development of the biometric screening process that the district and the committee have been working on. Educating self-care, campaigns, challenges, etc. So he's one point person. And then some of the other, just I would say, touch points. Shad Fonta and Amy Frank were involved with the committee, leading the committee. You do already have 131 biometric participants. And then there's also a health assessment, 155 participated. You're starting to see newsletters, Google sites, wellness campaigns. The 20 million steps was one of the campaigns. They are getting additional prizes. Just trying to change the overall culture, which historically had been, I have this health insurance card and I'm going to dang well use it to, let's figure out how we can effectively start impacting our health status. As far as the handbook change to contribution, I don't know if you want me to expand on that, or do you want to touch on that? Dive in?
Go ahead, I'll answer first.
Sure. So my handbook change, the whole objective is getting 100% participation in biometrics. The idea here is, if what we've seen over the course of, I'll say 15 years, when you have voluntary participants, while that's a very nice number and a great start from a district standpoint, let me reveal a secret. Without even knowing the results, those that participated by and large are those that are already pretty darn healthy. What we need to get are 100% participation. Individuals like myself that frankly, if it wasn't for me participating in my biometrics, I wouldn't be able to compare year by year by year what my cholesterol levels were, what my blood pressure is, what my, how my weight changes. And those are some of the key factors that when there are little tweaks, having somebody catch it early on can make a tremendous difference. And the treated diabetic versus the untreated is one of the key examples. Please.
So you're suggesting 100% entire family, or are you just talking employees?
The initial phase that, I'll go back to CESA 2, we've kind of done this in a progressive stage. First stage, staff members that are on the plan. Second stage, staff members and spouses, significant others that are on the plan.
Okay.
So in the end, majority of the focus is around the adults that are on the board. The health contract does have implications if we don't reach our thresholds. And that's the whole purpose of including this in the handbook language. We will continue to, for the next 2 years, see that 5% cap, even though our claims levels right now would suggest, again, calculation of around 22. We're gaining that 5% cap if we start doing those high participation levels, achieve the levels, and that really gives us a couple years to really amp up our wellness programs. You'll see if we have 85% or greater, there's no additional surcharge, but when you start sliding down, you can see as much as an additional 3% if we don't achieve certain thresholds, additional 3% to our premium. And every percent is what, Steve, about $70,000? So putting that into perspective, that could be a couple $100,000, over a couple $100,000 impact if we don't achieve those levels just by motivation.
So will there be a fee charged to the employee who doesn't participate in the biometric screening?
So the handbook language that you will be reviewing next month will include this language, but what the plan is to increase insurance premiums overall, but to allow employees to decrease the premium they pay by participating in the biometric assessment. And we're doing it that way because we want it to still be voluntary.
It's a reward. Yeah.
And they're rewarded for participating. But we need to have that motivation in there because on that last chart you saw that the district, we have this cap if we meet their thresholds for participation. We need to do something to motivate staff members to participate in those health assessments, as well as their spouses. Now, the requirements that Dean puts forth for spouse participation is lower, but again, if we don't put something in there to motivate spouses to participate, it's not going to happen. So the language will have those premium differentials, and you'll see that next month.
What if the spouse isn't on this health
It's
insurance?
only for people who have family plans and the spouse is part of the plan. Staff members who aren't enrolled in the insurance won't be affected by this at all.
Jessie McCarthy has also been participating as a nurse liaison. She's the newest addition that Dean has provided from a resource standpoint. She is shared between Sun Prairie School District and Waunakee, so it's refreshing to have an individual so focused and devoted to just two districts that are so close to each other. So it's great to have her as a resource, and some of the numbers that you'll see as far as some of her participation. She had 32 individuals in a relatively short period of time for behavior and disease management visits. Some of the discussions around nursing, access, navigation, whether it's customer service, the personal health, and one of the additional items that's becoming prevalent throughout Dean, more and more prevalent, is the e-visit promotion. What is e-visits? Basically, historically, if you had an urgent care type situation, you had to go to the urgent care or emergency room, and it's no secret that kids tend to get sick or have issues in the worst time of the day. Number one. Number two, when you do go to emergency or urgent care after hours, it can be 10x of a normal charge, and it's very expensive. What the whole idea is using technology that you can truly, whether you're using a smartphone or even a phone call or whatever, your computer, you can have things checked like your sore throat, and there's certain types of e-visits. And what you're going to find is not only does it not cost the individual from the standpoint much less, it also costs our plan and our claims experience much less.
Actually, we heard a couple of positive comments when we had kind of like a linkage meeting with staff. That there were individuals at the HR table. I mean, basically saying that's really great, even if it's just because say if a child even has like a sore throat or something, you can just do it, things like that, so that they feel much more in control of even their time, as well as dealing with the issue. So it's wonderful.
So consider this an option, not a requirement. You know, it's a new option, and this also goes back into the category of we need to get better and more efficient healthcare delivery models from the standpoint of the Cadillac tax and all the other challenges we have.
Mark?
Please.
Sorry for asking the question, but I can see why this is in our best interest. But why is it in Dean's best interest? I think they would rather get a larger payout by us going to their urgent care.
Because if they don't evolve, somebody else will have their business. Because in the end, employers choose what will position them to best attract and retain high-quality staff. And if the provider system outdates themselves in an inefficient model, they're going to be left without membership, which ultimately pays their bills. So as far as the status, what are some of the objectives from a overall? There's a clinic design that I'll say throughout CESA 2, we've been studying throughout CESA 2 what model would work in this geography. We have a unique provider alignment where the provider systems own their own health plan, so it's unique. You're going to have a lot of fun watching what takes place in the state plan because they're proposing to go self-funded, but the amount they save on Affordable Care Act taxes are going to be far offset in the Dane County geography with lost discounts. So it'll be real interesting to see how that plays out. So in the end, as we have evolved from a clinic model in this geography, the UW system and the Dean system have been very aggressive in their evolution the last 2 years. Prior to that, they were very reluctant. So we're seeing them evolve. In addition to the clinic models, integrating the wellness program more and more aggressively, as you see with your handbook changes, and the ultimate objective of seeing some cultural changes in interest from a consumerism standpoint, and from a clinic model, creating something just for this clinic, creating something that's for the clinic staff and their family, creates a competitive advantage. We're seeing that more and more with districts throughout the state. Seeing something that would have a fixed cost for 40 hours a week for a specific provider, as opposed to something that gets ding claims every time you go to that provider. That also would create some stability in our cost. Potentially physician oversight for whatever clinic model would be provided. Call it $25,000 a year would be part of the discussion. And the overall idea is by July having some type of a format finalized for board review. Some of the different topics that the local provider might be able to provide, whether it's minor illnesses, injuries, pharmacy services, vaccinations, physicals. You kind of see the overall spectrum that is being revisited to identify where can we get some ROI of return on investment in this type of a model. Questions?
I mean, you were talking a little bit about the state's concept of heading towards or looking at self-insurance, and I'm in the building trades, and the vast majority of building trades are self-insured. We have our own statewide plans for the electricians, it's about 5,000 members across the state.
Mm-hmm.
So we get away from that one specific geography hitting you by getting across the entire state and being self-insured. We're under the Affordable Care Act, we're under Cadillac plan, all the same rules as every other insurance company. But we have not had an insurance increase in 3 years. And when I sit there and look at Dean and I look at everybody else, I'm sitting there going, seeing 8, 10, 22% and crazy numbers like that. And then I'm seeing us, and guess what? We go to UW and we go to Dean. Yet our insurance isn't going through the roof as fast as everyone else's, and we're not even going to hit the Cadillac plan. And we don't have a $3,000 deductible. We have a $1,000. And that's family care. I'm trying to understand why we sit here and we're saying a 22% possible insurance increase is okay. And then I go back to the slide where you're saying the premium cost was the cost of claims and the cost of, well,
Administration.
administration. What's the cost of administration at Dean Care? Ours is 3%.
There's a 7.
Not incredibly high.
Not at all.
But then that's where I totally lose the disconnect between the fact that I can go to Dean under Dean's health insurance and have to pay so much more here in Waunakee, or I can go to Dean under the IBEW's insurance and I'm paying $1,055 a month for a full family plan. Why am I practically being doubled, yet I live in Dane County? And that's the part that I never understand, and I can never seem. We've tried to get American Family and all them to come in and do these comparisons, and they practically refuse to walk in the room.
What do you mean by American Family?
Well, we used to have American Family Insurance before, was running our statewide insurance before we went self-insured and created our own insurance company.
They have for health insurance?
Oh yeah, this was years ago.
Okay.
And then we've gone to Dean Care, we've gone to, who was the other one? The big HMO, starts with GHC and stuff, and had them look at it, and they never come near our number, and I just can't figure out why.
90% of our client members are self-funded.
That's
None of them in Dane County are.
I know, because you got to get to a statewide one to make it worthwhile. Or we did.
Well,
But-
and I'd be glad to take a look at your contract to see what you cover versus what this plan covers. Because when I've done that in the past, the rest of the state's more expensive than this geography. I don't know what your population is, or do you have primarily male population that are
Primarily
younger?
male construction workers. No,
Well, that
they're-
you just answered the question.
Our primary age range is 47 right now.
different
Is our average
Yeah,
range.
we're not dealing with apples and
So,
apples.
But-
can we get on with the presentation here?
Well, what I'd like to ask, is there any consideration? We used to have WEA, that seems to be different now. But is there anybody looking at doing self-insurance?
We look at it every year. In the population that we have here, it would cost us between 20 and 25% more in our geography than it would what you currently have for a plan.
If we went only the Waunakee School District?
Well, it would be even more expensive if we included all 48 districts that are participating in the CESA 2 initiative. And the reason is, right now, the provider systems, now use Middleton as an example. Middleton, for the last 15 years, has paid less in premium than they paid out in claims.
Say that again.
Middleton School District has, with our negotiations, because they are even more in the heart of the provider competition, meaning who owns Unity and Dean, the UW system and the St. Mary's and Dean clinic system. They are in the heart of where the ownership exists. And they are so aggressively pursuing with their own health plan that specific district that they're willing to charge less in premium than they're paying out in claims. And they've been doing that since roughly '98. So it's real hard to try self-funding a group that would have to pay 30% in their case more to self-fund than what they're able to achieve with this. We look at it all the time, so it's not because we don't like it.
They're in a similar plan to ours?
Mhm.
So then another way of saying that is we're paying part of their costs.
Not at all.
Well,
We look at your claims, we look at doing what you just described. If we were to aggregate all the claims together, collectively, the water level would go up substantially. We've tried, if we were to consolidate and describe what was described by consolidating them all together, then that would be a true
you wouldn't keep them
statement.
for a client, though, out of the goodness of your heart. You're getting the money somehow, some way.
Well, I'm not an insurance company, so.
Right. I mean the insurance company.
So the providers, are they cost shifting to a degree? Probably. But in the end, if we were to consolidate everyone together, we also benefit from that cost shifting. We're benefiting from those other employers that are paying substantially more.
Okay, any other questions specific to our district? And there can be an offline conversation between you two.
Absolutely. I welcome. I appreciate that.
Great. Thank you. Wow. Okay, update on the Innovation Center.
I just have the light behind us, please. I realize we have quite a few things on our agenda here yet, so I'm going to try to move quickly through this discussion, but I do have some additional information that's not found in your packet, just to share with you. First of all, I appreciate the board's support as we've gone through our work with the Innovation Center. About 5-6 weeks ago, we had an open house at the center where we had approximately 50 businesses and community members coming in to talk to us and for us to share what our vision was for the space. One of the things that occurred at that meeting actually was some of the folks who were present approaching me, Jack, Greg Benz, and saying, we'd like to get together to discuss how we can improve the environment of where this Innovation Center would be located, otherwise the classroom space. So we had a meeting about a week or so after the open house. Ended up that those businesses brought in about a dozen people. And what they did was they went through from top to bottom looking at the classroom. They went behind the walls. They asked us to take out the ceiling tiles. And then they worked with Epstein Ewan to say, here's the things that we would like to consider. If we're going to be helping to contribute towards creating this center, we want it to be a nice environment. So let's put down what we think we can do to improve this. So between Findorf, Epstein Ewan, Findorf, and Westfall, they came up with really, this is a visual context of obviously that Epstein Ewan put together, just that shows kind of what we are looking for. Really a workspace in the middle, equipment around the outside. The one thing that you do not see in that is present in this picture on the left-hand side that's not present there now is a handicapped accessible ramp. So that was one of the things that Epstein did for us, was looked at from a code perspective. If we touch anything in that room, what do we need to upgrade? One of those things is the accessibility. At this point, we have about $73,000 in dollars that we have in the bank in the district for use for this project. And those have come from the grant we received from the state. We also received an Enders Foundation grant. We've also received some dollars from local businesses that have contributed towards it. The second part of the meeting that we held with all of our partners on that day, looking at really developing kind of this picture, was Findorf going through and putting a cost to it. And that's really the spreadsheet that you're seeing in front of you. What you are articulating here is the ideas that came forward that day, from improvement of the ceiling, the electrical, the floor, and looking to see if we can put windows in that provide some visuality into the space. The last page, I'm just going to jump to that, you really have, on the last page of the spreadsheet, you have a total cost of $197,000. The second column over is really articulated as they've made some deductions out. There's been some in-kind contributions from those companies to help us try to move this project forward. So without the contributions, you're at 197. With their in-kind contributions, you're at 113. So there's obviously been some, very thankful that there's been some interest in the project and trying to move that aspect forward. The question I really had initially for you tonight was wanting to be able to utilize, without having, the spreadsheet came through at 5:10 this afternoon, so I really haven't had a chance to vet through it. Had a quick conversation with the person who put it together just to try to get a better sense of what we're looking at. I think there's additional savings that can be taken place in here, either things that we either postpone for a future part of a project, or aspects that we can continue to raise funds or find donations on. We already have a verbal donation, for example, on some painting. There's some things with demolition that we probably can accomplish ourselves that start to take away at some of the costs. My initial ask for the board tonight was really just some consideration so that as we're moving forward and trying to put this plan into action, to be able to use the dollars that are associated with what we've raised thus far to really start to move the project forward. That was without seeing really the costs that we have associated with the design and the in-kind contributions that are being proposed. A question that I have for the board this evening, and I know that it's not your preference to see things on one night and have a decision, but I'm looking for some guidance given the timeliness of when this came forward, is there is an opportunity of time this summer to really accomplish some improvements to that space. And just seeing what options we have as a district to help move that forward. I have dollars of about $73,000 that we've already raised. I have to also pay for some of our staff training that goes along with that. The dollars that are in front of us is the $113. I think we can knock that down, I think, considerably as we move forward with continued work on the project. But I'm looking for some options from the board to potentially see how we can move this forward, even if it's we use some of our facilities funds to fund part of this that we can either reimburse back as we raise additional funds, or to see what options that would be amenable or conversation with the board to try to accomplish some of the improvements to that space that I think would be nice to have for the fall. That I'll answer any questions. I know I went through that very quickly.
So you're saying that basically the physical costs would be this 113, but then there's training costs on top of that,
Yeah.
which is what range?
Yeah, you're probably looking at $5,000–6,000 that we have in training.
Okay.
And so
maybe 120 total.
yeah, you're looking in that neighborhood. I think we have a lot of the equipment right now that we can mobilize into there. I think there's some additional equipment that we would like to purchase over time, but I see with what we have, we can move those pieces into here, and then as we are either looking to add on to that, that's something we can add on much easier than going in and adding to renovations, which I think we can. To me, that seems like a priority area to get that piece started with the equipment that we have.
So this number doesn't include that additional equipment you're talking about?
No, it doesn't. That doesn't include the equipment, and it doesn't include the furniture piece. This is really just the physical space in the room. It's cleaning up the ceiling, putting in new light fixtures in the ceiling, moving an electrical panel to a back room. It's putting in the ramp. It's rebuffing the floor. One of the partners was asking because if we do this, we should really put in like an epoxy floor, something like what you see in different areas. So that's really what's being recommended and tossed out. I just really wanted to have a conversation with the board to see what amenability you would have to helping us move that piece forward, given that we are going to be continuing to raise funds for this, and we have some meetings coming up in the coming weeks. But I think our window for some of the work is this summer. I think our best efficiencies with regards to the work are while the partners are working on it in the space this summer.
Not to get too much into the detail, but I did notice the windows along that one wall, and I believe currently there are lockers on the other side of that wall.
Right.
And I think when I went to the open house, I heard Brian express some concerns. So not only is it the cost of the windows, but we got to replace those lockers and move them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Is that still a priority and something we really, really want to do, those windows?
I think it's important, because I think as you walk by, you want to see, you want to showcase, and when you start working with the community, it's important.
And what I would say is this, there's not a lot of lockers in that area. We would probably shift those lockers down to take some of the smaller blue lockers that are out. We still have locker space available on the second level. And from my perspective, I think one of the issues that we're hoping to do is bring student interest into that area, because right now I can guarantee you that there are students that go through 4 years of high school that have never been behind the Oz curtain, if you would, because they just don't go there. And I do think that, again, part of part of the aspect of renovating that space, if we have the ability to do that right now, would be to open that up with that window so there is that perspective down into that area. Because I think by doing that, if we look at what we're trying to do, again, and I think keeping in the perspective that it's not just a tech ed area. You know, we're talking about already having the art students down there, having the physics students down there, having students in our, you know, an example, again, going back to the open house of having students that have been working in Cocopelli, some of our students that have special needs, being able to have them down there, running the laser engraver, that type of thing. So really trying to have that space become, certainly it's going to be housed in an area in proximity to what has typically been technology education, but it's a space, again, that can be used by, you know, all the curriculum is truly integrated into those areas. And I think in order for that to happen and continue to have that interest level peak, that having that those windows in there, not only for our students, but for parents when they're there at parent-teacher conferences, open house, visitors to the school, that it will certainly help showcase that. And I do believe that we have adequate locker space still available on the second floor that we can either house students there, or again, we'll move some of the smaller blue lockers up, which we had done periodically over the years on a fairly consistent basis because those lockers are tiny.
So it looks like they're basically moving 36 lockers, based on this cost estimate. But okay, so then there's this $73,000 you've raised so far. That $73,000 is all from contributions, or is some of that from our budget being moved?
None of that's from our budget, that's all from contributions or grants. So the 73 is all from the state grant, Endress Manufacturers Grant, or from donations.
So just to look at the base of this training in this room, we need to come up with about $45,000.
That gets you in that ballpark, correct.
And that doesn't include any furniture.
That doesn't include the furniture. There's some options. We have some furniture we can put in there. There's some plans that we have to improve upon that. There's I think many of these pieces can be, there can be some moving parts to this and some staging as far as when things occur. And that's a part that we need to go through, really, that spreadsheet in a little bit closer detail. I think some of those items that we can do in a more efficient way. I think there's some of those things that we potentially can find other partners who can help us with some additional donations. I think the 113 is kind of our worst case scenario if we don't find any other partners with regards to it.
I think you're absolutely right. What we're looking at is trying to keep this on a tight timeline. You know, we want to get this thing open September 19th for the high school open house. We've got, Randy and I have fundraising meetings set up, you know, over the next 2 weeks that we're feeling pretty comfortable with. As Randy indicated, last week we got some verbal commitments to pick up some of the costs in this from a company. We're also, you know, as far as equipment, we're being somewhat creative with that, where we get consignment equipment, so we get fresh equipment on an annual basis. So I think we've got some great momentum going with the project. What we're asking for is just a maximum of $45,000. If we can't raise any more dollars. Go ahead.
I guess I'm confused. So I thought the 73 took the 197 down to 113.
No. Those are in-kind contributions from other partners.
Findorf not taking payment. Is that
Part of it, and some other contractors as part of that. When they take some of their fees out, if there was the full draw, it was the 197. They've taken some of those costs out.
So to meet the 113, we've got 73.
I've got
and so
73.
essentially you're just asking to rearrange certain monies short term till more is available?
That would be, that's correct.
That's exactly right.
Karen?
And then, to me, you should start with the number being what it is, and show the donation by them too, which you kind of did, but it's
Yeah.
indirect. When you did, when we walked around with this, my concern right away was that we're gonna spend all this money redoing the room, and the money that they got given to us for whatever doesn't go to equipment. I remember being there with Brian, and Brian, he's talking about getting all these other 3D printers and all that. Well, that isn't any of this. So that was my concern then, still is now, was our people who gave money in on this design and did that? Is that who did it, or was this Epstein, you and Findorf and at that moment?
Some of the folks who had provided some of the dollars were part of those meetings, and they're also part of some of those additional in-kind donations.
Right.
We've also had the dollars that weren't designated specifically just for equipment. They were to really move the project forward. And when we articulated it to them, we shared that we did have a lot of the equipment to get it started. It was to really also improve the space from a learning aspect. So I think it's all of those pieces, Gary, but I don't think there was anyone saying this is only specifically for equipment. And as Jack shared, I think there are some opportunities for some of the equipment to be on a loan basis. I think some of it we will have to purchase over time, but I think we'll continue to find dollars to do that.
I'm just saying, you get people to donate, you want it to go in the direction of what it's supposed to help them with, or they're gonna be dissatisfied.
And I think.
Want to make sure that we're doing that.
Yeah, I would agree that we're doing that.
I gotta say, I'm kind of worried about this. We are basically committing money from nowhere to go to something that might go a certain direction. It seems like we're pushing the project ahead of the funding. We've never done that I've been on this board, is we figure out where the funding's coming from, we put it together and we say, this is what we want to fund. Right now, we're saying, we want to fund something, we're not sure where the money's coming from, so let's commit to it. It's backwards. I gotta admit, I brought the same thing up, similar a little bit, about funding a staffing position out of a contingency fund. And this is getting even further down that road. And then, I don't think any of us would even think about doing this with Warrior Stadium. Saying, well, we're gonna pay this amount of money, we've raised this amount of money, but let's go ahead and start it anyway, even though we haven't really finished raising the money for it. Yet we're gonna do it for this. And it just seems like we're pushing the project ahead of the funding. And that's not something we should do.
And I understand that, Dave, I think.
And if that even means coming in and saying, we're gonna take $45,000 out of the maintenance fund, at least we said where it's gonna come from before we said build the project. Right now, we're not saying where it's gonna come from. And it's great to say there's donors and there might be more donors and all this other stuff, but I'm hearing might when we're committing and signing a contract to pay money with a might.
Two things.
I don't think that's proper.
Two things with that, though. One, when we hired the staff, it was gonna be a need anyhow, and it was gonna get funded the next year, so I didn't see a problem with pushing that forward.
And I voted for it.
Yeah.
I agree.
So-
This just
so
seems a further way down
sometimes-
that road.
I know, but that got twisted sideways, and all of a sudden it's in the paper, because it was just a pre-funding a different way, and we knew we needed the thing, and we did it. I didn't see that as bad at all either. With this project, I'm asking these questions, and I have concerns, don't get that wrong too, as long as everybody's on board with doing the same thing. But I think as a school district, it's a great direction to go with a whole bunch of other students, and this is your industry, that we need to supply better. So I'm in support of that type of a thing. And yeah, we're a little bit ahead with whatever, but we sure seem to move money around a lot of other different times to make things work. So I don't see it as we're killing ourselves that way. But I like the direction of this. When you watch the workforce and what is happening with people and them seeing opportunities, not just with college. And I think we need to emphasize there. So I'm for it that way. I'm not for necessarily spending all the money on that. I was hoping it was going to be more towards equipment and innovative stuff. But I haven't done every meeting here, and I'm going to support a vision set by guys. They are raising money. Maybe we don't raise any more, and so then I'm committing a vote to $45,000, which I think is a good direction to go with something.
But why can't, as part of this, we identify right now where we're gonna take the 45,000 from if it doesn't come out?
Well, that's fine.
I have
So
no
then we take it
problem
out
with
of
that.
maintenance or our referendum spending. Well, you can't take it there.
Can't take
but,
it there.
yeah. The other
Okay,
stuff.
Mark?
It's in the high school.
Yes, that was my point. I feel this is such an important thing to go forward. We've already committed an expenditure for the instructor. We have a huge community, I think, commitment to it already. As a board, I think we really owe them a commitment to it. And if I'm personally willing to, if we don't want to give the leeway for administration to find the money piecemeal, either define it tonight where it comes from, or actually approve a short-term loan for $45,000 to get it done until through the end of the school year.
And I think that was, literally I said, this came in, when I pulled Steve out to the side before the meeting, that was the conversation we had, was exactly what you were asking, Dave, is where would the dollars come from? And that was, our quick conversation was to take it from our maintenance fund. Is there anything else to add to that, Steve? I mean, we have.
Sure, just a quick comment. Typically Joe Bellamo brings in a series of projects that we like to try to do during the summer. However, this summer he only brought in the gym and the lighting at this point, and then he also said that he's probably going to bring back the boiler system for the pool. So we have very few projects going on in our maintenance budget. And the main reason for that is the huge focus that Joe and his team have on the big projects, the completion of the new intermediate school, the Heritage project this summer, completing the roof at Prairie, which is demanding the majority of their time. We do have an annual maintenance budget that typically includes projects significantly more than just doing a gym, lighting and gym floor. And at this point, there hasn't been anything brought to the board for consideration. So we have very little that the board has approved to this point in the district's maintenance budget. If the board chose to do so, that would be an area that funding is remaining available in the 16-17 budget that has not been approved at this point in any other manner. It's basically sitting there for projects that I know of only one, which is the pool boiler that Joe wants to bring before you still this summer. So it's a very light year on projects on the district end because of how heavy we are on the referendum end. So the bottom line is funds would be available within the maintenance project dollars if so decided by the board.
Okay, so that could be part of a motion, for instance.
It could be, yep.
Well, and again, I share everybody else's excitement and enthusiasm for the project in general, and I get why we got the list so late. But one of the things that's occurred to me is another something that got mentioned when I toured the building was the faulty ventilation system. And I don't see anything in here about upgrading the ventilation system.
It's actually a complete in-kind door.
Okay, so that's a separate item.
So
and that's
it's
why
one of the yellow items that are blocked out,
okay.
and there's no cost to it.
Okay, because obviously with increased use, we would need to. And then it occurred to me, is there a way to prioritize this list? And so, yeah, let's go with the front stuff. To me, I'm sorry, the windows are nice, but if we're short, that is another big dollar item. Could the windows wait? I mean, that kind of thing. Chances are we have the money by the end of the summer, so we wouldn't have to worry, but that would be another way to approach it.
The point I would say to that, Julie, is that's exactly one of our next steps. It's also to take some of making sure what we have for our equipment, our staffing,
right.
All of those things. We need to pull all those pieces together. But I'm confident that we'll be able to move those things forward. But given that we're here tonight, I wanted to make sure we had the conversation and see if there was a way we could continue to move this piece forward with some comfort level, understanding that it's coming at a very late time for the board to really have full dialogue on it. I feel comfortable, as Steve has just articulated, with using some of the maintenance funds to temporarily help us move this forward, and we'll continue to raise the funds. We're also going to be very judicious with how we spend them, because I think we want to make sure we can spread them as far as we're able to.
Gary?
That said, we always do this, and we've been working hard on creating a list of things to do or fix or whatever. They're not going away. So this is taking into it anything maybe it isn't happening this year, but it's going to happen. So we are committing funds or delaying something else because of doing this. Unless there's more
It's our intent to
Donations and
really
stuff.
work on that, the donation fund to.
Twist a few more arms.
To repay those dollars.
Okay, so what administration is looking for is approval to work within the budgets as outlined, and my guess is that
Additional 45,000, I
with the
think that
additional
was the
4 to
number.
5,000, and then if you want to make a part of the motion, you know, where the funding is going to come from, at least in the short term.
I would make the motion for what they're requesting with the funding coming, with any necessary funding coming out of the capital maintenance.
Say that again, coming out of what?
Coming out of the capital maintenance fund.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Dave, second by Jack. Any further comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Announcements?
Announcements, we just had a correspondence from some community members with regards to our equity policy. So you'll see the letter that is included in your packet.
Okay, on to committee reports. Now, most of the information for the committee reports is in the packet, so I guess in terms of moving through these items, I'll let Steve, first of all, take the budget committee.
What you see before you tonight are several action items that were all reviewed by the Budget Committee, and I'll just touch on what's included. Item 2 is 2015-16 budget changes. Every year in June, we do present for the board's consideration the significant budget changes that have occurred throughout the year. A great example of that would be when the budget was approved by the board in October. We did not know at that time that we were going to do a refinancing during the month of January, which we did do, which saved significant taxpayer funds in our debt service fund, but obviously we didn't budget for that. So at the end of the year, there's a series of adjustments that are presented to the board for consideration. There are 5 of them which are outlined for you in board book. They were reviewed by the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee did make a motion to recommend their approval. The second draft of the budget was reviewed at the Budget Committee and was forwarded on to the board's consideration for action tonight. The only change of significance was the special education reallocation plan. That information was reviewed with the Budget Committee. The Budget Committee did recommend forwarding that on for full board consideration tonight. Lease agreements, we do annually request approval of lease agreements. We did review those lease agreements at the last Budget Committee meeting. The Budget Committee did vote 3-0 to recommend those lease agreements for your consideration this evening. And the last one is a real formality. Once a year, the board is required to approve the fund balance accounts that are going to be used prior to the end of the close of the fiscal year. There's no changes recommended this time. Again, this topic was reviewed at the Budget Committee meeting, and the recommendation is to forward it on to the board for approval on a 3-0 motion. I'd be happy to answer any questions about any of those 4 action items, as well as I'm sure any of the committee members would as well. But each of those 4 items, we are looking for approval from the full board this evening.
Okay, so one possibility is given all the information that's been provided, where we can actually act on them individually or act on all 4 as a motion for approval. So we can have a motion and then discussion.
Make the motion to approve all items as identified.
Okay, a motion by Jack, seconded by Mark to approve all 4 recommendations coming out of the Budget Committee. Are there any questions?
Steve, what was the lease thing, that the 250,000? When I asked that, now I'm forgetting what it was. Remember I said that it was there and it went away?
Sure, yeah, the question you asked Gary was the lease item in the budget, and that was related to the Chromebook lease,
Oh, yeah.
which we were required to record the full amount of the Chromebook lease in and out in the 15-16 year, which isn't there in 16-17. Yep.
And then the one question I had asked Steve, and he graciously answered, was with respect to the shifting of the funds within the special education area, the speech and language. and making sure that, student needs are going to be covered based on existing staff. And it sounds like basically Kurt feels real comfortable with taking this as the recommendation, and then next year being able to cover what needs might exist as well at that point. So just want to make sure we don't, that we have the way of meeting student needs in the speech and language area, even though we're taking one position, shifting the funds elsewhere. Okay, any other comments or questions? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. On to curriculum committee. There's one action item, which is the textbook adoptions. That was information that was in the packet. And then there's, okay, Tim, did you want to provide any information on that?
Yeah, so, textbook adoptions, what is up for adoption are the actual titles. So, for example, if you were to look at that textbook adoption sheet, you would see a few different things. We have the Go Math program, which we've talked about a few months ago. That is our grades 5 through 8 math adoption. There's a separate memo on that. It includes things like our new AP Calculus BC course textbook. That's a new course you approved earlier this academic year. We're adding the next phase of our CAP program with UW-Oshkosh, so that means we need to formally adopt the textbook that UW-Oshkosh requires for the aligned course. So there's just a variety of items on there, and these are instructional materials for our students. They're primary materials, and so your formal adoption of these based on teacher recommendations is the action item.
And it was a 3-0 vote on curriculum.
Yes, it was.
Okay. So is there a motion to approve the textbook adoptions that come in with the curriculum committee?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Julie and Jack. Any questions? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. PE waiver.
PE waiver. So in your packet, you should have a brief memo from me, and the memo references something that I believe was also in board book, which is kind of a policy brief from the Department of Public Instruction regarding the Phi Ed waiver. So just, by way of background, one of the later items on your agenda tonight is a revision of our policy on graduation requirements. And this is something that we've been working on for a while. One of the topics that has emerged in the process of looking at kind of some of our major goals for the graduation requirements revision has been, overall, giving kids more flexibility to get the courses they want that line up with their future plans. And something that's come up as part of that, again, is the question of the PE waiver. So just to kind of, recap what's in that memo, in Wisconsin, students are required in their high school years to take 1.5 credits of physical education. A few years ago, the state provided a local option for school boards like you to entertain the option of creating a physical education waiver, which would allow students participating in an organized activity, and again, a fair amount of latitude provided to the district, to take that activity in lieu of a half credit of Phi Ed, provided that that half credit was used for a core course. So you could, for example, in our system, take astronomy instead of, were you to approve a waiver, take astronomy, which is a semester course. It wouldn't allow you to take Calculus BC because that's a year course, but both are core courses. It would not allow you to take dollars and cents because that's a business course and that's not a core course. So there are some limitations for the flexibility kids would have, but it would provide additional flexibility. The legislation was approved in the spring of 2012, and so we actually had a discussion, some of you were on the board at the time, in 2012 on the topic, and that ultimately culminated in a decision in December of 2012 at the board level not to proceed with investigating a PE waiver. That was not a vote on a fully fledged proposal. It was just, do you want us to spend time working with the fire department and other stakeholders to come up with some ideas for you to look at? So in the course of looking at the graduation policy, the topic has come up again. There's been a few more years. We have a few districts across the state that have enacted PE waivers, so we can see some different models. We have a little bit of information, and if you wanted to look at this, we could develop more information from districts and what the impacts have been in terms of students in those high schools taking advantage of the waiver. And just in keeping with the general topic of providing kids with different options, it came up as this is something we probably want to kind of check in on again. And so, in talking with Randy, we're looking for, from you as a board, is some direction on how you want us to spend our time. If this is something where you have an interest, we would look at it and bring up concrete proposals, or at least some different ideas for you to then respond to. Because I think when we hear PE waiver, a lot of different things can come through our mind, and we're trying to kind of put something to something that's a little abstract. And our goal would be, if you said you wanted to pursue this, we would bring in proposals that would be concrete, you could react to, would kind of give you some different flavors. If it's not something that you're interested in us exploring further, then obviously we wouldn't explore it further, but it's really your decision as a board, and that's why this is on the agenda. Would be happy to answer any of the questions that you might have on this.
Mark?
I'd like to add to that, we've had several discussions at the committee level about this. We actually did have representation from the PE department come to the committee and express their lack of support for the concept. As a committee, we felt it was important for the board to give a direction. As a large group, is this something that needs to be, that the board would like to be considered for further study?
And I guess I'll just add to that, because the question has arisen, I thought we put this to bed once, why is it being brought up again? It is something I continue to hear from parents and students as an option. How come we're not exploring this if it is available? I also wonder, some of the objections that came up before seem to place a high value on the specific content of what happens in our PE classes. And I'm not saying I disagree that that is important and good and worthwhile content, but we seem to have made another decision, someone did, without it either coming through committee or for the full board, in terms of some of our students now taking online PE. And to me, if that decision was made that this is a viable option and a good way to offer flexibility to some set of students, I don't understand why the PE waiver, we would have more control in a sense to me. We would have more ability to judge with input from the PE department themselves what participation in what of some of our co-curricular opportunities may offer similar physical activity and encourage similar lifetime encouraging kind of healthy physical activity behavior. So we opened the back door with the online. I am still hearing from parents that it's something students and parents would like to have. The makeup of the board has changed. I think it's appropriate we discuss it as a full board.
Do we discuss it, or do we do a motion and then discuss it?
Well, actually, we are looking, it's a possibility. We're not taking action on doing the PE waiver, but to ask administration to invest some time in coming back with some proposals, looking at the detail and all that kind of thing. So we can basically have a motion to consider it, take a vote, and that can answer the question whether we are going to have them spend time and then have the discussion after the motion.
So the motion is to have them spend the time.
Spend the time, yes. And
To
we
develop
need
a proposal.
To develop a proposal.
Some of the
for
issues
what it might
that
look
when you
like.
look at it is for just one simple part, what activities count?
Yeah, I looked through the
Yeah.
list that
And then
that
the question could
WASD
be,
provided.
when does it get to count? After you've already done the
Yeah,
activity
DPI, actually.
or anticipation of? So there's a lot of moving pieces. Is it worth having someone put together a proposal that would be suitable for the Waunakee School District.
I would make the motion then that they look into the proposal and develop what they think would be appropriate.
I second.
Okay, the motion by Dave, seconded by Jack. Discussion.
We have spent a lot of time coming up with an incredible list of new courses and avenues and things for students to do. And in sitting down with my daughter the last 2 years and seeing her next 2 years, she's not going to be able to get to take half the classes she wants to take. And I'll tell you now, she's taking the online PE. Why? So that she can get into the advanced English and all the other stuff she wants to do, and writing and poetry and on and on and on, that you can only do in high school. You can't do that online very well, and there's nowhere else to take a badminton class. You can take badminton somewhere else, or you can take it in high school. But taking comparative literature, you can't really find that anywhere other than in college, and by then it's kind of rough. But some of the classes like FACE or the business classes and stuff, it's very hard to take anywhere else. And once you're in college, you're heading towards your major.
But you can't take those.
So a lot of the breadth
Those don't count
becomes
because
hard.
those are electives.
You're
So
right.
it has to
You're
be.
right. But she can use more in those electives there and then
True.
still have more room otherwise.
True.
I mean, everything shifts around one way or the other.
Gary?
I'm not opposed to looking at this or having that, but we just spent a half an hour on a discussion of health and wellness and how it affects you financially and what you do. And here's an opportunity to teach it at an age where it could be effective and useful later on. As I remember them coming in and defending the Ffa point, they were saying that Ffa's become much more than just badminton. It's more of a health and wellness type thing. Now, maybe that's something we need to look at. Maybe we need to make our curriculum more directive in our Ffa and how we do that and make sure that it's there to offer that. I'm not saying anything other than health and wellness is important. If the only place they're getting it is Ffa and they're using it there, maybe it's a very important thing for a life skill, which is what we're supposed to be here about. They can direct some of their studies later on to however they want. This is an opportunity to maybe only get this right here.
Okay, Mark?
Something else I'd just like to share with the board that we're dealing with at the committee level. One of them is the online PE that has some uncertain there's some questions about who does and who isn't allowed to take it based upon a set of protocols that does exist. And that's a secondary concern. That's not part of the waiver issue, but I think as a committee, we would like the board to do some discussion about when we're ready to move forward with it. We do have 2 classes that are going online experimentally this next year. One is the health class, one is a career workshop, because there are students who come into the district after the fact, they're juniors, and or seniors, they have to take this class. How do they fit into their schedule? It's only a quarter class. And part of our discussion was with those, well, if it's going to be allowed for one student, it should be open to all students. And that would be part of the discussion we would like to bring forward when it's appropriate, as well as with the online Ffa. That if it's so that's down the road, but that's a secondary issue. But it is connected to this topic.
Right, and something I could see happening is, in addition to kind of bringing more on the online back through the curriculum committee, I know you as a board have talked about maybe doing some special meetings next year, and I don't want to kind of, occupy too much real estate.
Tim's gonna fill them up.
If you were to give me carte blanche, I probably could fill up your special meetings. But if I was to say there was just one topic from the C&I side that would be a good special meeting topic, it would be the online. It is an evolving area, and it's also a multifaceted area. And there are a lot of different reasons kids take it, and it's a tough topic to do justice to without some more time. So, but yes, the online would be part of it. But, again, getting back to the Ffa waiver, it's really just a sense of what you want us to look at. And we probably, and to let you know, we would probably come back with more than only one proposal. We might come with a proposal that we would put a little bullet next to saying we think this might be the best fit for us. but realistically would bring you back a few different iterations so you could kind of see what the reasonable options would be.
Our discussion of the timeline perspective was that if the board wanted us to move in that direction and gave us that tonight, we would be looking at it over the summer when our staff came back in the fall. We'd grab our Phi Ed department and work with them as far as what are some of the nuances of the language that you can work within that, and then those drafts, as Tim is talking about, would be what would be brought back and proposed to the board. And then consideration could be given to something concretely that you can see.
Well, and then we've just got they're in the middle of their self-study, or the beginning of their self-study as well, and it was one of the individuals who was on the outside evaluator input group that has some specific recommendations and thoughts in this area based on her work as an educator at UW-Whitewater.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I would hope that her expertise would be also included in this. Joan?
Well, my concern was the whole online piece and who can and how that has all morphed into what it is, which I'm not aware of what it is. But maybe now is not the time to go into who and how that has all evolved. You know, my gut feeling is, I think if we have, graduation requirement, it should be good for everyone. And I don't know. I thought we had this discussion 2 years ago, and I don't feel anything has really changed. I think our PE program offers, as Gary said, a wellness component, and it's different than participating in a sport. And a sport is so one-dimensional, and kids participate at all different levels. Some just fill up their afternoons, and it's just so, to replace one for a graduation requirement, to me, just doesn't have a good fit. But I'm not opposed to looking at it. I would like to know where this online issue has evolved to, but I think the requirement is a requirement.
I would echo Joan's sentiment. Devil's going to be in the details on this one. And I know there's lots of examples out there, and again, there's input that can be provided by this professor from the university who's part of the self-study team, because there's different ways of measuring what actual growth in health is. We'll just leave it at that. So I'm cautious, but I would be willing to support looking into it. Julie?
I think you can argue both directions. And again, I do not mean to suggest that it's not an important and worthwhile class. It is for many students. I value flexibility, and I think we should be allowing students to bloom and play to their strengths. And who am I to say? And you're right, it does boil somewhat down to that requirement. If we actually deem it important enough that it is a requirement, then a requirement is a requirement, and we shouldn't be allowing so many skirts through the back door.
I agree on that.
Has never been part of our discussion. Those have always been one-off exceptions that someone else is making without any of us talking about whether it's justified or not. So that is another whole topic. Again, I am the person who brought it up. It's because I continue to hear from parents. It's a flexibility that some students would like, that I think it's appropriate for.
If the topic is flexibility, if the goal is flexibility as opposed to credit requirements, then I would also like, at some point, the conversation about the role of summer school. And if the rules are changing in terms of, what can be considered credit or not, and all that, because define flexibility. Flexibility can be provided in lots of different ways, and sometimes it's the delivery system, like whether it's online or whatever. I believe in the importance of good physical education programs. So.
I support Peggy that, if there is flexibility, our summer school should be more productive as far as learning experience than I think some of the things that we have in there.
Okay, so there is a motion unless there's any more discussion. There is a motion on the table right now to allow administration to come back with some different ideas on looking at proposed waivers for the PE. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, policy committee.
Can I just ask one
Oops,
quick
please.
question in looking at the minutes about the online option for the career workshop in health? So this is going to happen as a pilot project?
Yes.
As staff recommendation.
The-
So staff will recommend who it's appropriate for.
Doesn't that seem weird that that doesn't have to be approved, but this other version has to? That seems
That
odd
is a
to me.
really good question.
And I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I actually like this because I think it's important for students to learn how to work through online projects. It's a great thing. But I'm just wondering why the board doesn't have to approve this on a policy idea. Why we don't have to approve this, but we have to approve.
I think
It's a great question.
That
So
seems
here,
weird.
so at first glance, you can certainly look at these and say they seem to be very much the same thing, but I think there are really two big differences. The first is when you look at something like online PE, that's something where you do actually, as a board, have to enact a policy change. That would be a policy issue. And the reason it's a policy issue is you're taking a state mandate, and which is supposed to be delivered by a licensed teacher, and you're saying we have this other activity that's not being delivered by a licensed teacher, but will satisfy this credited requirement and allow the child to substitute elsewhere, which I think from some perspectives, may not seem like a big deal, but from a state law perspective is actually kind of a big deal. In the case of the career workshop and the health, those are courses that are going to be still the same course with the same objectives, still delivered by the same teachers, Dave, that would be doing the face-to-face sections, but they just want to pilot a different delivery model. So, kind of in the sense that when we pilot a new vocabulary curriculum or pilot a new set of math materials with a section, we don't bring that in for prior board approval. For something like this, we share the information, but it's not really an action item. Now, if we were to suddenly say, this is happening, it's a permanent thing, then yes, that's the kind of thing we would bring in for an action item, but this is going to be a one-semester pilot. We'll bring the information back, and if we were to decide to continue with it as a recommendation, it'd just be a recommendation that then you would have to ultimately approve if it went beyond a pilot stage. I don't know if that helps answers the question, but I think administratively, that's how we kind of distinguish between the two.
I guess I will just say it was presented in committee as a recommendation coming from staff, and their recommendation too was that students be selected based on staff recommendation. I do have concerns that once that door is opened and other students find out other students are doing this other option, you will get more requests. And so again, we will have this problem of who gets to decide who that's appropriate for, and why should staff recommendation necessarily be a stronger recommendation than a parent or a student's own arguments of what they feel is in their best interest.
Point of clarification, I think Tim did a good job, but basically there's a need for these kids who are coming in. And the online approach gives an opportunity under the guidance of the classroom teachers who are using their own prep time to oversee the programming, to provide an option for these transfer kids or out of district kids coming in to make the requirements they need for graduation. The trial is capped to one section, I believe,
Yes.
Of 15 kids, and it's going to give them some data to find out if it's a viable way to meet this need or provide alternative needs going forward.
Yeah. And I think what you're going to see, and I'm glad you shared that, Mark, you're really going to see two different audiences of students in there. One is the health and the career workshop. While they float, in general, even though we allow them to float now, we still have the overwhelming majority of kids choosing to take those in the 10th grade year. If we have a student that comes into us in their senior year, there's a health requirement that really in most districts around the country, they probably have satisfied in some way. So Brian might look at their transcript, and it's fairly easy for him to look at their transcript and see where they may have satisfied that health requirement. Our career workshop requirement is the one thing where we have a local requirement that goes above the state minimum. And there is a certain population of kids that come in every year where we have to do some creative things to get them to have it. So that would be one population. You know, I am kind of curious, you know, along your lines as well, Julie. I'm kind of curious for the non-move-ins to see exactly who does end up taking this. But again, from my perspective, it's a one-semester pilot. In some respects, it's very similar to years ago, if you remember, when Lisa Carruthers did a pilot of e-readers in English class. How did kids do there versus with the books? One section had the e-readers. Ultimately, that was a pilot we decided didn't pan out that much, and that's why you don't see e-readers in all of our English classrooms. But it's something we piloted to try out. This is kind of a similar thing for health and career workshop.
Okay, on to policy committee.
Policy committee, I'm going to let Tim continue with the floor. We had a policy committee at 6 o'clock prior to the meeting tonight to forward some discussion, and you'll see on the agenda for a first reading. I'm going to let Tim talk about the items that are found in there and then some of the tweaks that took place during the policy committee's discussion.
So this is a revision of our graduation policy, which really has been a set of discussions with teachers in the curriculum committee that have been going on for more than a year, partly because we had some kind of programmatic things that the committee wanted to look at, and we had some housekeeping things we needed to look at. So I'm going to start with the housekeeping things. You can see the change in red on the piece in front of you, and this is more current than what's in board book. And so the two housekeeping things, and if you lack a copy, let me know and I'll bring it. In the current version of the policy, that shift to the 3 credits of math and science, which takes effect in diplomas awarded in 16-17, was kind of like a parenthesis, here's something that's going to be coming on. Well, one change we're making is just kind of updating it, starting with the kids we have now. It's 3 credits, there's no conditions on it. The other piece of housekeeping is the legislature, again, for diplomas starting next year, has added a civics exam requirement. And so this is just kind of a pretty standard language piece on the civics exam requirement, except, and I guess it's a good thing, DPI sent all district administrators a statute update email. I think you got yours at what, 3:15, Randy?
Yes.
And buried in there was a little change on students with disabilities and the civics exam. So talked with the policy committee tonight. We updated the civics exam requirement language in there to conform with what we got from DPI this afternoon. So those are kind of the housekeeping items, and we've talked about the civics exam before. This is all state requirement stuff. The other thing in line with this discussion of giving some greater flexibility is, as the committee has looked at this, one of the things that I heard from the committee was we really want to simplify our policy, conform it really to what is the state requirement and no more, at least in terms of what we choose to enshrine in policy. And so we had some pieces in there that referred to specific courses. And so really, but we only did that in some content areas, not others. So we specified courses in English and social studies, but we didn't specify courses in science, even though as a matter of practice, really every 9th grader takes biology. And so what we did instead was we came through, and the policy committee, and this was in line with what the curriculum committee had discussed, eliminated the specific courses. So really what you have in here is almost more of a distribution requirements that conforms to state requirements than enumerating specific courses. So it's just a goal to simplify the language.
Good.
And policy approved it 3-0 just before full board met. And this is the first reading.
I guess the only question I'd have is then should we change it to say, instead of specific high school course requirements, to say credit requirements? Because at some point, we're probably going to make reference to the high school
Handbook. or-
handbook,
Yeah.
yeah, because, depending on your career pathway, you're gonna maybe take these classes
Yep.
or whatever, but then, so it's
That's a
really
good
just a
catch.
credit requirement.
That's a fantastic
That's
catch
right.
and recommendation, and I just crossed it
Okay.
out on my copy here.
So this is the first reading, so there's no action tonight. Is there any other feedback with regards to the policy? Awesome.
Okay,
Thank you.
great,
Thank you.
Okay, next item is the consent agenda. The only additions to what was in board book would be the information that was with respect to the addition of a resignation, Keely Meyer, and the summer school staff additions. Other than that, entertain a motion for approval of everything, or pull something off for separate
I
action.
move we accept the consent agenda in its entirety.
Second.
Motion by Mark, seconded by Dave. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, legislative update. I think all of us are actually starting to receive information through WASB. And I don't know if this is something Tim's actually is interested in, but the ESSA rulemaking listening sessions are coming up now where people will have the opportunity to provide input to both DPI and the state legislators in terms of the rules. There's a lot of flexibility that's being provided in the new language update event, No Child Left Behind. And so that gives a lot of leeway and flexibility at the state level. It's important that if you feel that you want to have your voice heard, that there are listening sessions and opportunities to provide that kind of input. Is there any other legislative update information?
Not at this time.
Okay, and then the next item that's on the agenda, I think I provided a summary recap. I don't know if you've had opportunities to take a look at what resolutions look like through WASB, but essentially there was a request that came to me with respect to having a statement in the WASB policy and resolutions. Pardon? Yes.
I hate to interrupt. Did we have to vote on the course option?
No, that was part of
No,
the
That was
That
part of
it? Okay, I'm
Yes.
sorry.
As part of consent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, there was a request that came that as a result of the change in language within ESSA that the opportunity exists to submit a WASB resolution which aligns with some other work going on around the state in terms of asking if music and arts be recognized within, what is the language here? What the Wisconsin Music Educators Association is doing, we're asking members of the legislators to support legislation that defines and backs music and arts as part of a well-rounded education. It wouldn't be, the request is for us to submit something that might be appropriate for school boards because of some of the issues that are articulated in the memo. So it wouldn't be language that would look like that, but if the board is interested in submitting a resolution, the deadline is September 15th, so that I would be willing to write something up, and it would be in line with the type of language that exists currently in the policy and resolutions manual in other areas. Like if you look at what exists, there's stuff out there already with respect to character education, supporting human growth and development. I mean, literally, language says, like, WASB encouraged districts to provide advanced placement and other programs. It would be a simple little statement that would exist in terms of supporting music and the arts as part of a well-rounded education. I'm just asking if the board would be interested in us, at least myself, drafting up some language and moving something forward for the board to consider.
I would not necessarily support that because I think that's a local decision, local control. And what we're doing is somehow, I would assume this ties into funding and everything else over time. I'm for music, the arts, I'm for athletics,
I think this board is, and I think we show that by what we do in planning our program.
And the purpose of a resolution is not to to direct local actions, it's to bring certain issues to the attention of legislation. So for instance, like there's new Title I funding that's being made available through the NEA that is available for things like arts. And I see Tim nodding his head, that if individuals aren't aware of that, as this being available, that there could potentially be funding coming from the national level, that the state can choose or not choose to participate in. And what we're trying to do is influence our state legislators to be aware of the fact that there is national support. And maybe you can explain it better than I can, Tim. And some of the ESSA, because it's amazing because what ends up happening, I mean, and I know it's a local decision, it's always a local decision. Okay, thank you.
So
But the
I'll
problem-
keep this real short, but I mean, there are changes with it. There's some things that can be funded or funding streams that are new, but if everything just kind of flows in the same channel, none of the new opportunities get tapped. So I haven't seen the resolution, but I'm
Well, there is no resolution that's been written. I mean,
Got
basically, it's whether the board says it's okay to at least write something and move it forward for consideration so that it can get to the delegate assembly. Basically, there's somebody at the WSB Board of Directors who's said if he can get a school board to pass something, he will make sure that it gets at least before the delegate assembly for dialogue.
I would make the motion to write the resolution for future consideration.
Second.
And discussion.
Moved and seconded. Any other questions or discussion? Local control.
Well, I think it's local
It
control.
is,
I
it's
think
always
you guys-
local control,
I
it's a
think you
state.
guys also brought up a point where there's other funding streams.
Yeah.
And when you start looking at it from the big picture, then it probably makes sense to have a resolution. You know, I think we just need a little bit more information.
Perfect, perfect.
On,
Okay.
on what we're doing here.
Okay, thank you. Motion on the table to pursue at least writing a draft resolution. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Future agendas and meetings, anything particular
I
that you?
think we have 3 meetings we'd like to schedule. One being the budget committee. So Gary, Julie, Joan. This is the 3rd draft of the budget. Last year we did it we did it immediately before the regular board meeting in July. So if we wanted to follow the same type of pattern to do that, we could do it on 5:30 on July 11th. Or we can schedule it at a time in the previous week, whichever you prefer.
5:30 works for me.
Fine.
Does that work for you, Julie? 5:30 on the 11th, all right?
Yep.
Okay, and then if I might add, that would be fun. The first item on every new committee, on every committee meeting agenda will be a discussion as to whether you know, how many meetings, if we can schedule them ahead of time, similar to what with curriculum is. We're going to ask that all committees consider that and possibly schedule meetings in advance.
Second meeting we're looking for is a facilities meeting, sometime during the week of 5th, 6th, or 7th of July. I propose the 6th of July. So our facilities committee is Jack, Dave, and Gary.
I can do the 6th.
6th work?
What date?
Jack? how about you?
July 6th is what they're saying.
What day is that?
It's a
It's
Wednesday.
a Wednesday.
Wednesdays are all right.
At this point, I can make it, but it might be tough.
Would you prefer
The 7th would be better.
the 7th work, Dave and Gary?
That's a Thursday.
Thursday?
Nope.
So, 6th in the evening.
Yep.
uh,
Is there a time that'd be better, Jeff?
5th? Would you say 5th, 6th? I can make 5th
The
too.
6th. Date, you can make the 6th.
Yep.
Is there a time that works better for you, Jack?
And would 6 o'clock be okay? Or?
Yeah,
Mhm.
Yep.
that's perfect. And the last one is an HR committee, and Connie, is there a week that you were looking at for that?
Yeah, I've got a couple options. The 22nd, which is a Wednesday
Of June?
of June.
And are you available in the mornings at all, Jack?
Yeah, it'd be 22nd in the morning.
Yep, so
And
it's
it's June.
Peggy, Joan, and Jack
Yeah,
for
June
HR.
22nd.
June 22nd.
That's okay with
Well, it's actually next week.
Yep, 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock.
me. 8 o'clock.
8 o'clock HR on the
Yep.
22nd.
That's all I need right now. I'll schedule co-curricular in July.
Okay, I think that's it. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
If you're opposed, you say it right.
Okay.
Robust.